Good afternoon. My name is Anna Jakobsson, and I am the chair of the Mistra Foundation. And it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you here today to celebrate Mistra's 30th anniversary. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on how Mistra came about and the creative thinking that set us on our current path. In 1994, the löntagarfonderna, or the wage earner funds, were dissolved, and Mistra was one of the research foundations created with an objective to focus on strategic environmental research. From the start, there was a thinking that these solving complex environmental challenges cannot be done with research alone, but needs collaboration between science, between policy, and industry. Over the years, Mistra has funded research programs addressing a wide selection of areas, including climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and many others. And doing this while also driving innovation, promoting sustainability across all sectors of society. A key element of Mistra's success is our sustainable investment strategy. Mistra has, by investing the foundation's financial resources, responsibly shown that superior financial performance and sustainability go hand in hand. And this has enabled us not only to fund crucial research, but also to be part of and promote the important transition towards a greener economy. As we look to the future, Mistra's mission is more relevant and important than ever, and we remain committed to addressing all the challenges that we face with the same vision and dedication and collaborative spirit. It is my hope that this afternoon will give you inspiration, new ideas, and also new contacts to integrate into your networks. And let us celebrate the past 3 decades of achievements and also continue together to work towards solving the challenges that we face. Once again, warmly welcome. And now I hand the word over to Anna Jörbon, who is the CEO of Mistra.
Thank you, Anna. I have a little bit of a feeling being at the family party. It's so nice to see you all here. It's really great. I could see chairmen from former Mistra boards. I saw 2 CEOs I think we have here in the audience. And we have long-time partners from the industry, from the government. I saw some researchers from historical programs and from programs that are running right now. When you came into this room, there was a film showed on the screen behind me. And that was a film from the springtime tour we made around Sweden this spring. We decided to focus on knowledge, and that's why we decided to bring all our research programs, they are roughly 20 at the moment, along a journey from the north to the south of Sweden. We had our first stop in Skellefteå, the 1st of February, and we discussed green transition and electrification. Then we traveled south and west, ended up in Göteborg, where we discussed circular economy and how to accelerate that, and also explored how we can develop new materials. One of these really nice first spring days in April, we started a stop in the botanical garden in the city of Lund. We continued to discuss the value of biodiversity, and we invited philosophers, financiers, politicians, and researchers. And now we are in Stockholm. This is the peak here in Stockholm. And we also are going to explore the future at this seminar. The theme of today's conference is knowledge, confidence, and leadership. Welcome up our two moderators of today, Eva Krutmeier and Rob Watt.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna and Anna. And hello, everyone. It's great to see you. And happy birthday, Mistra.
Yes, a really warm welcome to you all. In fact, I think you in this audience are one of the reasons why it's really worthwhile celebrating Mistra.
Oh, yes.
Many of you have been involved in Mistra. My name's Rob Watt. I'm thrilled to be one of the co-moderators today. I am the engagement director at SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute.
And I'm Eva Krutmeier. I'm a science communicator and a science writer, and I've had the privilege to actually facilitate this Sweden tour that Mistra did in the spring, and that was fantastic from so many perspectives. Well, yes, today Rob and I will actually take turns in leading the panels, guiding you through this afternoon. So in the first panel, Rob will be sidekicking me, and we try to do the opposite in the next panel. And then let's see what happens after the break. Okay? So, is it my turn?
It is your turn, I think, because, well, we were expecting another guest today, weren't we? But as you all know, a week, in fact, even a few hours, is a long time in politics. And so, unfortunately, we aren't joined today by a minister. But that doesn't matter, because it gives us a bit more time for us to spend with our fantastic panels.
Yes.
And there's something a bit unusual about today, because we've gathered just this amazing group of people. And unlike a normal birthday party where maybe, you receive presents, what are Mistra doing this time?
Oh, I think Mistra's actually doing... I think of Pippi Longstocking. I don't know if you remember, but when she celebrated her birthday, remember what she did? She gave out gifts to her friends instead of receiving them herself. I actually think she put them in a tree and let all her friends, do you remember? Today we want to give you fantastic speakers with thoughts and reflections that maybe we haven't really thought of ourselves. Myself, this is the best birthday present, to be able to dig into something with the help of another thinker, another panelist. So we have tried to, mix them in ways that perspectives and angles come together and bridge in quite some unusual ways, I think.
Yeah.
We start with an Icelandic poet. So we start actually with this narrative and what is going to happen in the world. And then over to Antarctica. And I can't tell you much more about that now, because then
Eva,
then to Tehran and then to Kiev in Ukraine.
But I have to stop you. Please don't unwrap all the presents before we even get
We shouldn't do that.
Okay.
We should actually just give some important information to you. And that is, in case of an emergency, we have green emergency exits over here, both sides of the stage and over there. And just please follow the green emergency exits. And Johannes Kyrka is our assembly point, if that should happen. Toilets are also over there to the left, if that kind of emergency appears. Okay, this event will be filmed and can be viewed afterwards, so that you are comfortable with that. Okay. Do you think we can kick this off?
I think we should.
We should. And thank you for now, Rob. Our first speaker actually planned to write a book on climate change. But after talking to some friends, he got second thoughts. He changed his mind. He's going to tell us why. The book is called On Time and Water. And it's something completely different. Please give a warm hand. I don't see you now, Andri, but I hope you... There you are! Please give a warm hand to the Icelandic writer and poet, Andri Snær Magnason. Andri, here you have time, here you have water. So on time and water, 20 minutes from now on. Is yours, and we look so much forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Hello, Mistra. Happy birthday. I'm not going to sing for you. You can sing later. Yes, time and water. So I met a climate scientist. So my background is in poetry, children's books, theater, and I met a climate scientist in Potsdam. And he asked me, why don't you write about climate change? And I said, well, I'm not a scientist, I don't have the measurements, I hardly understand the IPCC reports, and I feel like this is up to the specialists to speak about. They have authority. My father's a doctor, and he really hates it when normal people give medical advice. So, this is your field. But he said, I've been producing data all my life, and people seem not to understand data, but they understand stories. So maybe it's not only that you have authority, maybe you even have a civil duty to write about this issue as a storyteller here and now. So I took this as permission, and I started to look at the data, and I noticed some challenges. One of the first one was when I told my friends I was going to write about climate change, they were all like, oh, here he goes again. And I was thinking how sad it is that my friends didn't feel like it was a subject that I should be working on. And the next time they asked me, I said, I'm writing about time and water. Then they were like, wow, that's interesting. What do you mean? Well, basically in the next 100 years, every single element of water on our planet is simultaneously going out of balance. The glaciers going down, the sea level up, the pH level of the oceans reaching a level not seen for 50 million years, the rain, the frost, the tornadoes, just everything being disrupted simultaneously. And they were like, wow, that's serious. And I said, yes, it is serious. Sometimes it's called climate change. But then the other obstacle was the language. If I tell you a sentence that comes from science, in the year 2100, we expect the pH level of the world oceans to drop from 8.1 to 7.7, and this is the greatest change for 50 million years. So I just said this. Would you have cried if I said 7.5? So in a way, every single word that I said is meaningless. 50 million years is too big. The pH level is too abstract. We can't scale it in our mind. And even 2100 is culturally meaningless because we were raised with the year 2000 as the future. And you probably all agree that 1970 was 30 years ago, and 2100 is after 100 years. So we're in this strange kind of way. It was almost like the issue was like a black hole. You can't really look straight at the black hole. You can't just bring out the data. And to see a black hole, you have to look at the periphery, at the neighboring stars and galaxies. So I thought, okay, to understand the future, I have to go to the past. If I want to talk about science, I need mythology. To be rational, I need poetry. And to be global, I need to be personal. So I was thinking okay, I have to kind of address this from a different angle. So I was thinking about time. I was thinking about the oldest things that I had come across. What does time mean? This manuscript here, the big D there, Deyr fé deyja frændur. It's from the Icelandic manuscript, the Poetic Edda, written around 1200. We can still read it in Icelandic, and I was thinking, can I write something that will be understood after 800 years, in the year 2800? And how has the planet changed more in the previous 100 years of this manuscript than the 700 years before that? And then I was thinking of the time that I could connect to myself personally, because I was so lucky to have all my grandparents until 2006. So I had 3 grandfathers and 2 grandmothers. So I could have access to the World War, the crisis. I could speak to my grandmother how she remembered how milk was precious when she was poor, and she was sent away from home 8 years old to babysit in another part of Iceland. I could speak to the last person that lived on my grandfather's farm for 1,000 years until they moved to the city. I could talk to my grandmother that wanted to do everything that her brothers were doing because they were doing cool things, and she wanted to do cool things as well. So like the first generation of women that were touching the realm of men. And she actually married my second grandfather, and they went on a glacial honeymoon in the year 1956, which was a pioneering trip to map and research Vatnajökull, which is Europe's biggest glacier. And these were really adventurous trips. And at this time, in 1956, the glacier was in the context of eternity, that it had always been there, and it would probably always be there, and they were the first generation to explore this glacier. And they were stuck in a tent for 3 days, and I asked them, weren't you cold? And they said, cold, we were just married. And then my other grandfather, Björn, he left to New York. He was a doctor, chief surgeon of the New York hospital, and one of his patients was this person here, Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb. So I was really starstruck that I could actually speak to somebody that had known this man and been his doctor, and asked him, was there anything special that you saw? You know, did you notice anything? Because my childhood was full of nightmares because of his invention. And he said he looked exactly like the image of Christ in my childhood church in Bíldudalur in the Westfjords of Iceland. And I went there and I took a picture. And he wasn't so far off. Both of these guys are actually symbols of time, because I'm born 1,973 years after Christ, but I'm born 28 years after the Trinity explosion. And many geologists, they have suggested that this should mark a new geological era. So this means that not only I'm born in a different time historically as my grandfather, but possibly I'm born into a new geological era than my grandfather. And that means that I'm born into a paradigm shift. And when a paradigm shift happens, then language collapses. And then new explanations come to explain who you are, where you are. And while the paradigm shift is taking place, there is a confusion of language. One example. When Iceland became Christian, we had believed in the Nordic gods. And if you were a poet, there were certain rules to write poetry. You never said sky, you said dwarf's helmet. You never said earth, you said the bride of Odin. Then they become Christian in the year 1000. And how do you write a poem about the new Christ when the language forces you to talk about the creator of the dwarf's helmet and Odin's bride? So you could not explain the new reality without having the whole legacy of the old reality kind of in your luggage. We all know then how Copernicus, it took like 100 years for his theory to be understood, because that was nothing that we could feel in our daily life. We had to trust scientists to tell us that the world was actually different from what our daily observations were telling us. And this took about 100 years to be understood. And we can look at democracy, because I was born with the notion that humans want democracy. Like, we are born to be free, we are born to know that we are equal, we are born to want to be independent, for example, in Iceland. And I was told that for 600 years we wanted to be free from the kings of Norway and Denmark. But in 1809 there was a revolution in Iceland, and this person, Jørgen Jørgensen, he actually gave us freedom. And he was inspired by the French Revolution, and he made this declaration here that Icelanders were free. We would have a parliamentary assembly in the year 1810, and where each person, as well the powerful as the poor, would have an equal share in the government. For us, this seems like we're born to understand this. But in 1809, the French Revolution had not been translated to Icelandic. Nobody had talked about this. Nobody ever mentioned independence until that day. And this was the first day that these ideas were translated into Icelandic, and they just were totally absurd. What do you mean, like the poor should have an equal share as the noble and the church? You know, it's total nonsense. This will never work. So he was mocked, this person, Jørgen Jørgensen. He was called the king of the dog days. So he came to be a not king, to give us freedom, but we called him king because we didn't have a concept of what was being a not king. And constitution, all these, how do you do this? It just didn't make any sense. So the people that understood what he was doing, they were born 1809, and even in 1850, 60, 70, these ideas were still radical, and it wasn't until 1918 that we got independence. And at the same time, women got the right to vote. And of course, everybody here agrees that women are equal to men and have equal ability to govern or do whatever in the world. And so you would think, okay, 50% of the voters are women, so how long does it take for an equal parliament to come out of a 50-50 share of voters? So but still in 1944, my grandmother, she was the first woman to get a pilot license, but you could still see that she was going against the language, because fæddur in Icelandic is a man, but fædd in Icelandic is to be born as a woman. So they had to mark out the ur. Because the language did not expect a woman to want to fly. In 1975, there were only 3 women in the parliament. So there was a women's strike, and 5 years after that, we had Vigdís, our president. And only 100 years later, these were the 3 top contestants of the presidential election, 3 years also after we had the first equal parliament in Iceland. So again, 100 years. So Max Planck said that a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. So this is a long loop to the conclusion, or what I'm trying to say is that I am born with kind of this is in Iceland, this is where Reagan and Gorbachev, and it's kind of the symbolic end of the Soviet Union. The house next door is Kaupthing Bank, the 3rd biggest bankruptcy in capitalist history. So not having reached 40, I had already seen 2 huge ideologies kind of crumble, and I was lying in this bush over there, and I was kind of wondering what is next, what comes after this? Because both of these ideologies forgot a very small, minor factor, that they were powered by coal, oil, and gas, and we were living in a very delicate system. And that's why new words come up that did not exist 100 years ago, did not exist even when I was in university, like the word ocean acidification, that is the biggest word in the world, because it's about one of the biggest geological events on the planet for 50 million years. So how can I understand that I'm living in an era where we don't understand? Similar to being in an era where there's no woman in the parliament, or I don't understand that the sun is not going around the planet. So this is the biggest word in the world, and it means that the oceans are changing on one single human being's life. They're not only like all the ancestors of man, if humans are 300,000 years old, all the Homo species, which is 5 million years old, but 10 times the evolution of humanity, acting upon a single life. And again, I can ask somebody, because both my grandparents, or 2 of them, became 98 years old. I could ask them, are 100 years a long time or a short time? And they said 100 years are like this. I feel like I was sailing in the Westfjords last year. I feel like I was traveling the glaciers 2 years ago. So we understand plastic. We understand, like before Copernicus, we understand the tangible world. We can understand plastic in the oceans as a big problem, but we really need scientists and that community to tell us the fact of the really deep change that is happening, that is far more important than possibly some plastic in the oceans. So in a paradigm shift, you're part of the change or you're hit by the change. And I was in these thoughts when I was invited to interview the Dalai Lama, which came kind of as a strange coincidence. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm Christian. I thought it was a joke. So I said, I'm baptized. I have to ask the Pope for permission. And then they called me the next day and they said, what did the Pope say? And I said, he said, amen. And I was wondering, what do you ask a person that has reincarnated 14 times? It has to be a super intelligent question. And I was thinking of cows, because in India they have all these cows all around. But in Nordic mythology, the world started with auð humla, humla of prosperity. So in the Nordic religion, the world started with a frozen cow. And it never made any sense to me. It sounded like a whispering game that went wrong. How can the world start with a frozen cow? But if you go to India, they have Kamadhenu, which is this world cow. But the foundations, the leg of this cow, are the Himalayas. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. They also have a cow. And this cow is something that, the auð humla is something that you will not see Marvel Comics make a movie out of. So I was thinking, okay, and if you go to Nepal, you'll find the Great Himalayan Trail ending in the district of Humla. And I was thinking, okay, that's interesting. It's probably a coincidence, but that leads you to Mount Kailash, which is the most sacred mountain in the world. And from that mountain come the 4 major rivers of Asia, the Indus, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, and of course from the glaciers in that region. And the origin of the Ganga is a glacier that is called Gomukh, and it means the mouth of the cow. And I was like, of course, a frozen cow as a source of life makes perfect sense as a metaphor for a glacier, because a glacier is such a perfect system. It releases the water it keeps the water when it's abundant and harmful, but it releases it when it's warm and you really need each drop. But it's better than water because it's scraping the bedrock, and the water is white, full of silt, which is the best fertilizer that you can get for your crops. So you can see how 1 billion people are actually living on these milky rivers that are coming from this frozen cow. But in the interview, the Dalai Lama said, don't ask me about glaciers. Iceland has much better glacial scientists to explain what is going to happen to glaciers in terms of global warming, because you've been researching them so long. So I went to the most distant person in the world, and he told me basically, go back and talk to your grandmother. So I went back to talk to them and into the research that has been gathered during the last 80 years. And we can see how the glaciers of Iceland are actually collapsing during this century. And this is nature leaving geological speed, entering human speed. And again, this is a paradigm shift. This is a completely different behavior of nature against us, against our time, and against our lives. So then the question is, what does 2160 mean? What is the meaning of 2160? So I take my daughter to my grandmother's house. Sorry about all this grandmother stuff. And we calculate, when do you become as old as grandmother? And my daughter does the calculation, and she can't believe the result. It's like 2104. And it's like, yes, imagine in 2104, you might be sitting in this same kitchen, and somebody comes to visit you, maybe not even somebody as young as you, maybe somebody 24 years old or something, like somebody born 2080. When is that person remembering you, somebody that you really influenced, somebody that you've known from infant until being like a mature human being? When is that person still talking about you as her greatest influence in life? And if that person, for example, becomes 90, and my daughter does the calculation, oh my God, 2170. So my grandmother whispers a secret to my daughter, something that I will never know, and she promises to keep that secret, something from the 1930s, keep that secret until 2100, and promises to tell that secret to that person and ask that person to keep the secret until 2170. So this is basically the handshake of generations, because our time is the time of the people that we know and love, the time that creates us, versus the time of the people that we will know and love, the time that we create. So my daughter will be able to touch almost 250 years with her bare hands. So only in the life of my own son, because he was helping artist Ólafur Elíasson to recreate a glacial series that he did in the year 1999. So in 2019, my son was helping the artist to find the glaciers again. And this is what has happened to the glaciers, not in the life of my grandmother, but in the life of my own child. And these are changes that you would normally have seen not during one lifetime, or 3 lifetimes, or 5 generations, but this is happening within the life of a child of mine. So I got the strange opportunity to write this plaque for Oak Glacier, which was the first glacier that Iceland loses to climate change. And I wrote, Oak is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 415 ppm of CO2. So anybody can calculate when is someone still alive that you will love. Wonder what do we not understand that we know for sure will be understood. We don't have 100 years to understand, like in democracy or other issues. This is an issue that we have to understand much faster than previous issues. But this also means that we're in a paradigm shift. There's a new center goal to almost everything, and that goes to science, education, politics, law. So if a young person that is doing something today, learning something, it means that every single job is dominated by this new paradigm. So if you become a lawyer, it's a legal issue. If you become an engineer, it's an engineering challenge. If you become a politician, it's the greatest challenge of politics of our time. If you become a farmer, it's about farming. If you go into fashion, if you go into construction or architecture, that is, every single occupation needs to be rethought and redesigned according to when somebody is still alive that you will love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andri. I can't help. We should welcome the panel up, by the way. But when they enter the stage, how do you consider then urgency? Because we are in a state of urgency. How do you cope with that?
I moved my profession, you could say, into this direction. That is, I could be writing a crime novel, but I decided, okay, if I have this talent, what can I offer with my talent? So this is what I thought I could offer. And so I feel like if I'm active and I feel like I'm doing something, and of course you never feel like you're doing enough. So, but I've been talking to students and business people and very actively the last years, hoping to help us to understand that we don't understand, and that will lead to understanding. Yeah.
Thank you so much again, and welcome the panelists. Yes, give them a warm hand. This is Nina Worms, and you are the professor of History of Technology at the Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, here in Stockholm. This is Kimya Kasempur. You are the project manager of WWF Sweden Youth, and you're also very welcome. And this is Philip Jonsson. You are the professor of Energy Systems at Chalmers, and also program director for Mistra Carbon Electrification. Thank you. And this is Rob, and this is me. So let's start with the first sort of reflection. Nina, please, what goes around in your head when you listen to Andri?
It's a thunderstorm, I think.
Thunderstorm going on.
Well, I think there's so many things in this presentation about time and about understanding and about connection and love. I think about my grandmother, who was born in 1912, died in 2014. Wow. When I told her about ocean acidification, she couldn't understand it. So I'm reminded of that. This is a vast task to internalize. It's unfathomable.
And Kimya?
Well, I was thinking about this, when you said that it takes 100 years for something to really be established in people's minds, and how we look at that. Is it something that is inevitable, that we can't change or do anything about, or could we change the narrative around that and actually be able to change the narrative in 50 years or 25 years? Or are we just helpless in that? It's really interesting to think about.
Do you feel a bit sad about that?
Well, because the crisis is so urgent today, yes, it's hard to not feel sad about it or feel helpless, because I think we need to change it. We don't have a choice. If we're going to just accept that from now it's going to take 100 years to 2124, then we as humanity won't exist anymore.
So we need to do it.
Yes, exactly.
Philip, what can you add?
Well, two things, but first I just struck me that I've been to Iceland once, only once, but before I got there, I thought it was very grey. So and when I came there, I visited, it's very green. And then I realized why I thought it was I expected it to be very grey, and that was because I saw a film when I grew up on TV on Iceland. I realized because we had a black and white TV set. But I think two things. One is I really enjoyed it, but I think one is two terms: responsibility and justice. And I think to think about our responsibilities, I think that's very interesting when you look at generations. So, young generation, maybe the responsibility is towards the future, and for us, older, responsibility was what bad things we did. So all the bad things we did, but maybe not the bad things that our ancestors did. So how should we look at responsibilities? I think that's very interesting. The other thing is justice. I think that politicians and all of us, maybe we have to take the decisions that not increase, but injustice. So I think that's also something. Some reflections.
Yeah, let's come back to that. Thank you so much. I would like to start with connecting ourselves a little bit the way you did, Andri, with personal commitments, and you also talked about your grandmother, Nina. I would like to start with Kimya, and if you can take us back in time a couple of years, almost exactly, I think. Wasn't it the 16th of September, 2022?
That's right.
What happened, and what did this mean to you?
Yes, so almost exactly to this day 2 years ago, a young innocent woman was unfortunately killed in Iran for just showing a few strands of hair. And that sparked the Woman Life Freedom movement in Iran, and that also spread around the world.
Her name was Mahsa Amini, or Gina Amini.
Gina Mahsa Amini, that's right. And growing up, I was born and raised in Sweden, Gothenburg. Growing up, I wasn't really, interested in politics or wasn't following what's happening in society and the news. I was kind of naive. I thought the democracy we have in Sweden is just, it's just there. Wasn't really thinking about why I'm living in Sweden, why my parents left their homeland to come here. There's a reason for everything. But when this happened 2 years ago, that really opened my eyes and made me realize that, I need to get active, I need to get engaged. And that's...
May I just, because when you told me the story before, it was also so fascinating because you were in the same age as Amina.
Yes.
So exactly the same age.
Yes.
So it could have been you.
It absolutely could have been
walking.
me. Because I have been to Iran a few times growing up, since 2018, and now after we've been involved in the protests as much, we will not be going back, unfortunately. But I have been there, I have walked around. It's very normal to have a loose scarf on your head, even though the law says that it should be covered all the way. So she wasn't dressed in an unnormal way. She was dressed just as pretty much every other girl is in the country. But she was at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and yeah, it was very unfortunate. And unfortunately, she wasn't the first for this to happen to, and she will unfortunately not be the last. It's been many cases after her death as well.
And this sparked your engagement?
It did, yes, because it made me realize that, what is going on in society, and I need to, open my eyes and see what is happening in Sweden, what is happening in Iran, in the world. I need to be grateful for the democracy we have here. I need to fight for it, to have it, be remained, because it's not a given that it will always be around. It's something that you actively, as people, have to be engaged in and worked on, because otherwise, if you don't have a say, if you don't use your voice, then someone else will do so.
You grew up in Gothenburg, and so did you, Philip. But now let us go back in time a little bit more then, I guess. Not to be
what
rude,
do you mean?
but possibly.
Yeah.
Are we in the 60s, maybe 1960s?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah. Do we have a time? Do we have a sort of moment in time that sparked your engagement, or?
Yeah, I'm thinking that. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that when I grew up in a sort of a middle class area with detached houses, and in the 60s and 70s, the car was really, people were proud of their car, they were cleaning their cars and so on. But we never had a car.
Your family didn't have a car?
So I mean, they could have afforded it, I guess, but so I know at some point, some year, I guess I could have been 7, 8 years old, I really felt bad about we didn't have a car, so often, once in a while, I posed the question to my father when he was sitting there reading his newspaper that, Dad, and I had really figured this out, Dad, if there was a lottery and we won a Rolls-Royce car and under the condition that we were not allowed to sell it, what would we do? And of course, there's not very much escape routes after that question, and he said, son, no he didn't, because I had to post the question several times, and then he said, oh yeah, well I guess we would keep it then. And then yes! There is a slim chance that we could have a car, but then it sort of faded away, and then I continued to
I wonder, Philip, now when you're in the middle of a quite polarized debate in Sweden on the energy issues, if you can be helped by this talent of yours to actually ask the right questions to the decision maker.
Yeah.
Maybe you can think about that next time.
That's a good point. That's a good idea. Yeah,
you do that. Nina, please.
Well, I don't think there is an exact moment for transformation in me personally. I think it's like a spiral. You come back, you're in the same place, but it's still a different place. But I have a story that I come back to, and it's about one of my children. We normally, like I think many families, we have ham for Christmas. And we buy too much ham, so the ham has been smaller and smaller. But one thing that we really like is the day before Christmas Eve to have just a thin slice on hard bread and some mustard. Right.
Me too.
And we were preparing, this is pre-pandemic, we were preparing the tree and other things, and then she asked me, so she's in the mid-teens, can we have ham for Christmas? And I'd never said that we couldn't. We were still eating meat. They were not vegetarians or anything. And she knew I was going to say yes. But there was something going on in her that had to do with what is right. What can I allow myself?
Is it okay?
Where are the limits? How are we going to continue? And it was extremely forceful. Because she's born in 2000. She's might be there in 2100. So I'm thinking about all these transitions that people are making, and how can we open up for a conversation that is not polarized, but just receiving and very empathetic to that kind of struggle in the tiniest thing that is a sandwich.
Andrew, would you like to comment on the ham sandwich?
Yes, well, I kind of exclude Christmas from things. So No, I have not. I have 4 children. So I think one of my oldest son, he was kind of getting climate anxiety when I was getting a bit too deep. So I was trying not to. I was struggling with how do I frame this to the younger generation? Because also when I had my first talk for teenagers, I just presented the cold facts, and it was like, it was like I was turning off the lights in their eyes. So it's like, can I find and also like the 100 years are a bit too long. So I was looking, can I look for examples, and even a very superficial example of telling them that if somebody told me when I was their age that I would be Skyping my mother, from another continent, when we still had a you both have to believe in some kind of progress that is, the problem is both technological, that is in the tangible world. So I basically told them that the last 30 years were all about this virtual world, about this digitizing everything, and that was the megatrend of the last 30 years of making this. The next 30 years are all about the tangible world. So the heroes of my generation, they were all like Zuckerberg or Gates or Jobs or something. But in a way, that's kind of finished, that transition. But the next 30 years are all about the neglected tangible world, about material, building material, circular economy, consumption, food, fabric, transportation, and basically telling them that if you look at the past 100 years, the world was kind of mostly built in good intentions, you would think. Like you wanted to give something to the next generation or to your society in infrastructure and building. But now we're in this cynical position where we feel like our daily lives are not contributing, but actually undermining the future. And so many are stuck in this place where we feel like our day-to-day work is not good, or at least maybe harmful and not helpful at least. So I was telling them that the next 30 years are all about the tangible world.
It's like a conflict constantly going on, isn't it, Nina?
Yes.
Would you like to...
The conflict between understanding and action,
Yes.
do you mean? Well, it's also a conflict. I'm thinking about what you're talking about now as how generations have different goals. And we're also in a culture right now where we have certain ideas of what humanity can and cannot do, or what a person is, or what's driving us. Some of them are wrong, because we know that. We can see through history that humankind has done and has had other driving forces. It's not in our DNA. No. It's in our culture. So I think that's a challenge, right? What kind of voices are we listening to, and what do we believe in? So we're fighting multiple wars, I think. And it's not just information about nature and climate, but it's about us and our societies.
Yeah. Philip, sometimes we sort of tend to focus on the wrong things. I know that you are also struggling now with time, in the sense of sort of investments that the nation Sweden and the EU need to do now, and the returns are so far off, so that today's politicians are not really feeling that this is what I need to do. It's not the whisper game that you gave example of, Andre. So how do you sort of discuss things like this with politicians, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a lot of things, but I think that what at least one can see from my research is about techno-economics, where we look at how we transform a lot of our infrastructure, power plants, roads, railways, and also embedded emissions in cement and concrete. And we know that we need to be climate neutral around the mid-century, and the mid-century is not, which I tend to think 50 years from now, because I guess I never accepted my age, but it's, what is it, 30 plus years. And of course, if we think about the historical turnover times of the capital stock, it's maybe 50, many things we look at. I mean, they are 50, 60 years of age. And we need somehow to combine the transformation of this with some sort of implementation of new technologies and measures. And it's not really what I often say, and not only me, but it's that the politicians is not, the challenge is not the technologies themselves, it's more about all other inbuilt in organizations and financing, financing is the other way around, it's very short term, so how we can combine this. So I think it's, I mean, this was sort of some reflections. I mean, if you are to talk to politicians, you have to be very clear. So,
do they listen to science?
I think they do, but I think I'm thinking about there is. I just asked Rob about the English translation. That there was a Finnish-Swedish philosopher, Georg Henrik von Wright, and he said something about the tyranny of the circumstances, omständigheternas diktatur in Swedish. And I think it's a lot in there. It was not about climate change, but I think it's a lot in there that we are stuck into. Even if we want to do good, maybe we live in a detached house with 2 cars or something because we have to, because our job opportunities were not exactly where we live, or the politicians, they have a certain room for maneuvering and so on. So I think that is something that is, we have to think how to handle that. So I do think that they normally listen, but of course their capacity to act is often rather limited. So
Rob?
I think those really interesting example you gave that connects with something that came out of Andre's talk. You gave many examples of pioneers. Pioneers in trying to establish democracy, the first pilot's license for a woman. There are plenty of others as well. And we then connected that with the fact that those pioneers perhaps didn't see some of their ideas realized for 100 years. We don't have 100 years for today's pioneers. So my question to anyone on the panel is, how does academia, how does policy, how does it equip these pioneers of today to make sure that, we've got the right language, that the change is happening, so that we don't come back to those glaciers and find they're completely gone. So how do we equip pioneers so that they're not just, faced with the tyranny of circumstances?
That's an easy one.
I don't think we should look for pioneers.
Okay, so
I think we should
for?
all be pioneers.
Okay.
We cannot look to someone else. We need to take responsibility. And there's several in the audience here. But we don't need to name them pioneers, like the ones who is the first woman flying an airplane. I think that is a thinking of a heroism, and that might also delay. So we don't have to wait for someone to follow. Why not be the one to follow? Rob, you're the pioneer.
Philip.
I think one thing that I think we've been, researchers, politicians, civil society, everyone's been not very good at is to explain and show what will this zero carbon or sustainable society, what will look like. Typically it will be some pamphlets with people bicycling in sunshine or something, but I mean it's much more than that. I mean it's maybe the way of living, the stressfulness in society, all kinds of things. I'm thinking if the politicians had to present, the national politicians, saying that within the Swedish climate political framework, if they were about to have to present a roadmap, what they with an end point. So I mean end point, but at least until say a couple of decades. I think that could help, and maybe with support from researchers. So I think that is something to me that I've been thinking of, that we have not been really good at explaining, because of course everyone in this room we sort of agree, but even we sometimes fly and so.
And also
really
there are so
difficult.
many uncertainties, I suppose, that it's hard to even do this future. We'll come back to the future
yes,
issue.
I know.
I would like to let Andre in also on this one.
So what I've often been thinking of is, what is the difference of myself when I was young versus my children where they are now as young? The difference, I think, is also in terms of meaning. That is, I think, the collective goal of my generation in this end of history era after the fall of the Soviet Union. The meaning was only to compete in the competition of the nations over, technology and markets, etc. Whatever I wanted to choose to be, there was almost nothing with a higher meaning, you could say. If I wanted to make a car or an airplane, or if I wanted to build a house, or design something, there was no clear meaning in the air, or clean urgency either. There were, of course, problems. So somebody could have meaning in solving AIDS or nuclear disarmament or something, but a collective meaning in the society wasn't really felt, at least not in Iceland when I was younger. So I would say that there should be a very deep meaning, and that's why I think that in the educational system, just like you have on the wall in your classroom, you have like Leonardo da Vinci, the man, you have the organs of the body, you have the birds, or you have like the periodic table of elements. You should have this trajectory to zero as almost like a collective goal of a generation, which is, because when you're educating yourself, you should educate yourself within the meaning of reaching that, and then of course in the meaning of biodiversity, and of course then in the meaning of human rights, which is, I feel like, is a bigger struggle now than was when I was young. So I would say there are more meanings, not available, but urgently needed when you're reaching young people. And meaning can be a very powerful thing. There's so much drive in meaning, because there's nothing less motivating than trying to study math without a meaning, or whatever field you go into.
How old is your daughter?
Have
to do the calculation.
There's so many.
Okay.
And they're always having birthdays. So it's
the one that talked to your grandmother.
She's 16 now.
She's 16.
She just started gymnasium, and then I have an 18 and a 22 and a 27.
So you have. So I was thinking, you are 24,
yes.
Kimia. So maybe you can be. You could have been.
Yes, you could be my second child.
Exactly, you could be second. So let's test this on you then. How important is it that your workplace or what you choose to do in life, that it has a deeper meaning, that it actually provides something for this transition and so on? What do you think around this, and how do you speak to your friends about this, and what do you collect there?
Right. Personally, for me, of course, I value that very much, to have meaning in the work I do, and it's absolutely something I strive to, but I do see a trend around me with my friends and other young people that, when there's harder financial times, for example, that makes people, want to ignore all what's happening around the world and just focus on themselves and their survival. And when that happens, their priorities shift. And, and also when a lot of shame is being used in this context, for example, this with when you shame people for flying, airplanes, when it becomes really like all or nothing, people tend to just want to have ignorance, because the ignorance is bliss. And then they just shut down, and they don't want to know about it, they don't want to read about it, they just feel like it's hopeless for them, and leave the work to others. So it's important to find a balance in that, so that people can both live their lives and not feel so restricted, but also feel that they don't have to be perfect, but they are welcome to do the best they can, because it can be I think young people can feel like if they're not contributing 100%, it's not worth it.
Nina,
not just young people.
Exactly.
I think you're onto something really, really important. This idea that either you're a saint or you're the opposite. And that's a terribly dangerous idea of transition, I think. It's much, much better that everybody does something than a few do everything, right? So if we could change that idea of that you have to be perfect.
Right.
We're not. We're human beings, for God's sake. We're not perfect.
Yes.
So I'm not sure why we get that feeling that you need to do everything right to be able to have.
You actually did a study on flygskam, fly shame.
Well, we did a study on people who stopped flying for reasons of climate change and so their transition to doing that. And it was a very promising and I think rewarding study because it showed change. It showed how information and conscience and love and other things could work for these people or had worked for these particular people, right?
But even them, I mean, even they had a conflict going on constantly, of course.
It's super hard.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. This is no easy road, right? So maybe that's also a thing, talking about our children and the children of our grandfathers maybe. Everything is supposed to be so easy. And it's supposed to happen very fast. And maybe we need to realize that it's not easy. And it's hard, and it might take some time, and we might fail, but we need to continue anyway.
May I just ask you about pioneers, because you didn't like them. So do you think that role models play an important role, or?
Yes, I do. I think that's a different thing than a pioneer, but I think that's because I'm an historian. I think the pioneering thing is a hero. A role model is not necessarily a hero. A role model can fail. A pioneer cannot fail. Then it doesn't.
You can be a failing pioneer.
Well, a failing pilot, I was thinking. Yes. That would be no good thing. No, but role models, I think, are good and important. And they need to be not perfect, because otherwise they're not role models.
We've talked a little about the role of research and science in policymaking and also in this transformation. I was wondering if we can deepen, if we have a few minutes, when it comes to knowledge and also try to bridge it to meaning, if we can. Because I wonder if it's sort of, I mean, I remember where I was when I talked to Bert Bolin, the meteorologist, and I actually understood climate change. I felt when I was there in this room that, okay, so now everything I do from now must be completely, it's a shift. And I remember I looked out on the green trees and I just felt like part of something bigger and yet so small. We all have those moments. And I wonder, is it possible to go back, to not understand something that I have understood? And this is something for you, Nina, to sort of unravel, but also for you, the role of science in this transformation. Nina, would you like to start, and then please, let's see where this
well, for some people, at least in our studies, science could be, or information can be that kind of eye-opener, and Bert Bolin was that too, but sometimes it's something else. It's a realization of generations, of children maybe, or of love, or something that sort of pulls the veil in a way. And then you realize, and life is never the same. But I think Kimia was pointing to something with her friends who do understand. They did understand.
Exactly.
But they're stuck, and they feel bad. So how are we going to sort of embrace them and help them do those things that they are able to do, instead of sort of dismissing them because they're not perfect? So I think the understanding is just one step. We need to act, and we might also need to have non-action, right? To do less, and there are many things that are at hand. But understanding is not enough if you don't have the tools of moving out of where you're at.
Philip.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, yeah, knowledge is, I agree with Nina, it's just one part of it. I mean, then it's what the expectations from you. Again, maybe the tyranny of the circumstances. What the expectation from society, and exactly what is in focus. Also now, of course, at these times we have. Also in politics, we have other, if you look at the EU, what they focus on, for instance, I mean, it was very much about climate and green transition. Now it's security supply and all these supply chains, vulnerability also. And I think what the responsibility for society and what we can hope of is that values and norms, they change over time. And if we can sort of steer society into hopefully get the values and norms, what is status? It's not the latest makeup or a motorcycle or something, it's something else. But I think that's really a challenge. And particularly at those times when we tend to, I missed to sort of grab what you said before, that there is this polarization in the political debate, at least in my field, and politicians tend to create, I mean, I'm not blaming politicians because we have it's just that the society sort of foster that they debate, and we debate often pseudo debates. It's not the real issue that needs to be debated. In my field, it's like nuclear power versus wind power, which is a sort of pseudo debate. So I think to be able to create an environment where we can discuss the right things, so to say. But again, I think one have to hope for this change and values and norms. It's not something you can change overnight. But,
Rob, would you like to add something there?
I mean, something that really strikes me that we're nudging towards is, Andrew gave this example of going to a classroom and having a sort of something there that shows the trajectory to net zero, how we take care of biodiversity, that gives meaning. And that maybe that's perhaps, we talk about the knowledge action gap, often the knowledge implementation gap in some cases, but actually that meaning is perhaps the missing connector, the missing thing that provides the frame. And but how, it seems very sort of paternalistic, very top-down to sort of create this meaning in that way. How do we do that in a way that actually galvanizes everybody to be a pioneer and for the role models really to take to step forward?
Would you like to start, Andrew?
Yes, so what I also think is, because we're in a mindset, so then comes global warming as a threat or a urge for transition, and still in the mindset, so we say, okay, we need transition. That is, we need electric cars. That is, we don't that. So when we think like, we often have the illusion that we're going to take this society and just power it with another energy source, but not that the change will be more fundamental. And so it's like this illusion that we will seamlessly park our Benz and dance into the Tesla. And like this will be effortless, and it will only be in terms of technical upgrades. That is, everything will be better, cleaner, but we won't do it until it is on that level. So sometimes I've done an experiment, like I ask people, okay, do you agree that, for example, climate change is a greater challenge than COVID, for example? And they say, yes, of course, it's much bigger. And then I ask, okay, name me the top 10 annoying things you did for COVID. And they could talk 10 things, they could tell you 100 things, and they could talk for days about stories and everything that was disrupted for COVID. And then I ask, okay, name me the top 10 things where you have been disrupted for climate change. And then they're like, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, just the top 10. Yeah, it's coming. The plastic straws, yeah, okay, very radical. My uncle bought a Tesla, okay, that's sacrifice. So we are kind of entitled. That is, we have not taken on, anything that is close to not hugging your grandmother for a year, or not going to a disco, or not going to the cinema. Just we haven't come close to that kind of challenging our daily lives for this cause of climate change. So that's what I'm saying about the language and paradigm, that we're still dealing with the crisis without entering the paradigm of it as a reality. It's more like an abstract issue, traffic lights, climate change, construction area, so it's yeah, so I'm not calling for an authoritarian leadership, but I'm saying that future generations will see me like you would see a person that was saying, like we were talking about how we don't hit our slaves anymore with a whip, but just with a softer device. So and that's why we are so good, because we don't hit them anymore. But instead of the paradigm of not having slaves, if you get what I mean. So I hope it's not so basically, in hindsight, I would have been a hideous person just being in that paradigm, and my books would be cancelled and everything.
But I was just thinking of that, Andre, since we're now coming to an end with this panel soon, but haven't we been trying to discuss something without having the language? Because that is the language of the last paradigm. We're trying to sort of bridge over to something here. And I was just thinking, what if 2160, this panel discussion was played up? What would they recognize? What would they say? That was interesting. What are they talking about there? So in one way, I just feel that thanks to you, we have touched a little bit closer to something than normal or the usual panels going on, just, bouncing the arguments in one's heads. We've tried to understand each other, and I really like that. But Rob, do you think we have time for a short bridge to the next panel?
I'm sure we do.
30 seconds, please.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that really struck me from what Andrew was saying and has come out of this was when you talked about nature entering human time. And that while we've tried to reconnect and understand to some extent that geological time and how our activities and our approach to living has pushed it into a different phase, a different speed, that perhaps the challenge in the future, what we need to not only whisper to the children, to our children, but also work very hard throughout society, is that reconnecting with nature in order to allow it to slow down again. That, I think, is the thing that came out to me really strongly from your talk and some of the things that we've discussed here.
We will continue during the upcoming break as well. I would like you to join me in a warm hand to this fantastic panel. Please come here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's go here.
So now we have truly taken on the geological time perspective. We've heard about future generations reclaiming the future, and perhaps with a very hopeful aspect that Andrew talked about when he said that for anybody young now being educated, they're going to be pioneers in some ways. They're going to be in professions that are going to completely need to redesign how they work. But now we've got an opportunity to go from the very long time perspectives into something that's really much more contemporary, much more now. And we're going to start off with a fantastic keynote. I'd like to invite our next speaker to the stage, Elizabeth Braw, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Elizabeth has just published a book called Goodbye Globalization, The Return of a Divided World. So we're really in the discussions of the day around the changing and shifting geopolitics. And Elizabeth, you're going to really kick us off and seed the next panel, where we're going to talk about the connections between sustainability and security. You may well have read Elizabeth's stuff in the Financial Times, in The Economist, where you write about the dark fleet that's being used by Russia and many other aspects of globalization and security. You're very warmly welcome. Please give her a warm welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. I brought some sheets with me here with notes, but I've learned from experience not to rely on my notes, because once some time ago, some years ago, I brought my notes, and then a particularly energetic custodian took away everything that was there just before I went up, and so I had to speak without notes, and so I will speak without notes this time too, because that way I can look at you as well. As Rob said, I have a somewhat less lengthy perspective than what you just heard, meaning less than a few million years, and indeed less than 100 years. And indeed, the perspective I think that is particularly useful to look at the moment is now, and what has happened now. And it occurred to me as I flew over, I shouldn't have flown over, but it occurred to me that when I flew over from London, that if Greta had started her her school strikes for the climate, or Fridays for Future, as they then became known, if she had started them now, would she have received the same attention? Would she have received any attention at all? And I think the answer is she would have received minimal attention. Indeed, the strikes are barely, or the protests, the marches are barely taking place anymore. Why is that the case? Well, I pose a question to you, and I'll suggest an answer myself. Why is that the case? It's because geopolitics has taken over the global stage completely. And another sign of that, of the advance of geopolitics, is the fact that in election manifestos in various Western countries, climate change is very much has very much been pushed to the margins, and even among greener parties, or indeed green parties. And you're seeing in Germany, for example, the Green Party even turning to coal power. That is a result of globalization. Germany has, of geopolitics. Germany has to figure out a way to get energy now that it's not getting the energy it used to get from Nord Stream anymore. So geopolitics is everywhere, including in the Red Sea. What is happening in the Red Sea at the moment? The Houthis continue their strikes against Western-linked merchant vessels, and one such vessel in particular is in particularly dire straits. It's the Soyunion, flagged in Bermuda, I think, but owned in Greece, and most importantly carrying 1 million barrels of crude oil. And this vessel, how many of you are following the Soyunion drama? Some. Yeah, so the Soyunion, as those of you who follow it know, is there in the Red Sea, and crippled by the Houthis. They first struck it with a bunch of missiles. Then they climbed on board, the Houthis, and put some explosives on board that then caused fires. And those fires are still raging. And what's even worse, equally worse, is that the Soyunion lost steering, so nobody can be on board to steer her to safety somewhere. So she is on fire, she is rudderless, and she's carrying these 1 million barrels of crude oil. And because she is on fire and because she's rudderless, that oil is at imminent risk of leaking into the Red Sea. And that would be an environmental disaster 4 times worse than the Exxon Valdez, because the Exxon Valdez carried 250,000 barrels of oil. This is 1 million barrels of oil. For those of you who are following it, I'm not telling you anything new, but what is particularly fascinating at the moment is whether somebody will try to do the salvage operation. Now, to do the salvage operation of a vessel that is carrying 1 million barrels of oil is really difficult, and especially if it's rudderless, and on top of that there are fires on it. But a couple of salvage companies declared themselves willing to take on the task, and the EU, thank you EU, put its Red Sea maritime force at the disposal of this mission. That was last week, and the understanding was that the Houthis wouldn't launch any more strikes while this salvage operation was taking place, because it's in everybody's interest that there not be a massive oil spill in the Red Sea. The salvage operation began, then the Houthis said, oh, hang on, we never promised such a thing. So the salvage operation had to then be cancelled, and that's where we are at the moment. There could be a massive oil spill at any time. Nobody will, in their right mind, will take on the salvage operation while the Houthis are firing missiles and sending drones and other things in the vicinity and even in the direction of the Soviet Union. So in the very contemporary moment, at this moment, we are facing a massive man-made environmental disaster as a result of geopolitics. And the geopolitics is that the Houthis obviously want power in Yemen and they want attention for what they stand for, and they are getting massive attention. And their sponsors, for various reasons, won't intervene to stop this campaign against global shipping, which most likely result in environmental disaster. And we have seen Russia and China not intervening, and because this benefits them, their vessels are not being struck. So that's a really depressing situation, but it is the situation we have today. And of course, we have geopolitics defeating climate change and sustainability in other ways, namely, for example, in Ukraine, where CO2 emissions have risen dramatically during Russia's war. That is just the nature of wars. You blow up things, and that releases CO2 emissions. And on top of that, the weapons production itself adds CO2 emissions. It's incredibly depressing. I would stop there, but then let's add how else geopolitics is affecting the world as we know it. It's not just sustainability and climate change are being harmed, it's also globalization. And as Rob said, the book is called Goodbye Globalization because globalization is losing out to geopolitics. And if we look, for example, at again, Russia. When Russia invaded Ukraine, just before Russia invaded Ukraine, what did the West do to try to stop it? It imposed massive economic sanctions, and they thought, if we impose massive economic sanctions on Russia, then surely the Kremlin will say, "Oh, that is definitely detrimental to the Russian economy. We want to be part of the globalized economy. So if you impose sanctions, then okay, then we won't invade Ukraine." Instead, they invaded Ukraine, and because they said, invading Ukraine, for whatever reason, is more important to us than being part of the globalized economy. The Russians managed to rearrange their economy by exporting oil using the shadow fleet, which is a subject maybe we can come back to after this. But the shadow fleet is not just very dangerous because it's rickety old ships that don't have proper insurance and are properly registered, and they also carry massive amounts of oil because that's how Russia exports its oil. So that was a serious blow against globalization. But there are other blows against globalization. We saw when or after the West imposed its sanctions on Russia, that Russia then said, well, we'll retaliate, and Western companies operating in Russia became sitting ducks. The ones that were smart and realized that the world was changing got out very quickly. At great expense, they took serious cuts to their revenues, or rather they took serious losses to get out of Russia. But that was a wise choice compared to the choice, or rather the reality facing companies operating in Russia. Now, Western companies operating in Russia, they can't get out of the country. Indeed, they can see their Russian operations seized by the Russian government. That's where we are. And this is reflected because businesses are very good at spotting changing trends. They may not consider the full picture, but they are very good at noticing when something is changing. The question, of course, is how they react. But anyway, they do notice trends. And here is from the latest political risk survey by WTW, which is a global insurance broker. they have surveyed companies in an annual survey. The most recent one just came out. 69% of companies say they have experienced supply chain disruptions due to geopolitical events. That's last year alone. 72% have experienced political risk losses. So political risk is anything from asset seizure to war. 72% have experienced political risk losses. 96% have invested in new political risk management capabilities. 70% believe that the decoupling between China and the West will strengthen. Only 8% believe that it will weaken. 74% believe economic nationalism and deglobalization will grow. 60% believe that the disruption of globalized business due to gray zone aggression, or what some people call hybrid aggression, which is geopolitically motivated aggression that doesn't involve military means, 60% believe that such aggression will increase. That is not a pretty picture for globalization. Globalization is in serious trouble. But and here, this is where it turns positive, despite all this mystery. I don't think this is a bad thing, because when the world, and especially the Western world, thought up globalization, or when we started building globalization in the late 80s and early 90s, it was all about economics. It was all about efficiency, and that efficiency has been incredible. We have, as part of this globalization, which involves really almost every country in this world, which is why it's called globalization, and which is why it's the most complete round of globalization ever attempted or achieved. Somebody said to me the other day, well, the Roman Empire was globalized. Yeah, there was a lot of trade within the Roman Empire, but not even the Roman Empire covered the whole world. This round of globalization really has covered almost every corner of the world. Most importantly, the entire Warsaw Pact, and especially Russia, and then China, serious new participants in market economies and globally trading, internationally trading economies. But when we set that up in the late 80s and early 90s, we did it with the view first that it's all about economics, it's all about efficiency, it's all about making products where it's the cheapest to make, and countries specializing and so forth. The global shipping industry helped that happen by becoming even more efficient, by building even bigger, not just tankers, but especially cargo vessels that can transport all of this. So it was incredibly efficient, and it was also built on this, all about economics, was built on the idea that other countries would become more like us. And it was just assumed that it's in everybody's interest to trade like this, and so countries will become more like us. They've already decided to go for market economies, and so by interacting more with us, they will go further along that path and become more like us. It's a little bit like, you know, when you meet somebody you think you fancy, and then you start going out, and then you sort of say, well, you know, I like him or I like her, and there are some things I don't like, but I can change that. And that's how we saw other countries joining us in this globalized enterprise. There were things we didn't like, but we sort of said, well, we can fix it. And that's what happened after China joined the WTO in 2001. We knew they weren't really fulfilling the requirements. We knew they weren't really serious about fulfilling the requirements that you have as a WTO member. But we sort of said, well, you know, we can convince them to become more like us, and then they will become more like us. And by the way, I should say, it's it really is similar to a marriage. After a while, you say, well, it didn't work, and then you split up. And that's where we are today. By the way, today, on this day, is my husband's birthday, and yet I chose to spend it with you. But we're still happily married. But that's where we are today with Russia and China. We have realized that the relationship isn't really working. Companies have realized it. Our governments, our decision makers have realized it, and citizens have realized it. And if I may be optimistic here, actually that's not a bad thing, because globalization was set up without sustainability in mind, without the environment in mind, without climate change in mind. And it was incredibly successful, but it was incredibly successful at the expense of the planet. And so here we get climate change, we get geopolitics, defeating globalization, harming climate change, but what we get as a result is a world retreating away from this super efficient system into smaller groupings, and by the way, also shorter supply chains. It will be massively difficult. But this gives us, this retreat away from globalization and the return of geopolitics gives us a new opportunity to think about where are we going to put sustainability, where are we going to put climate change in all of this. And it also gives us an opportunity to find new ways of working with the countries that are now our rivals or even adversaries, because it's in their interest to keep this planet operational, even if not harmonious. And I think that's where the conversation will go and should go. How can we work together with our now rivals and adversaries to make sure that at least we get climate change and sustainability right? Because that's in their interest too. They won't become like us. We may never share values, but we do share an interest in keeping this planet alive. So I will end there with, I think, how many seconds do I have left? Is it 10 seconds? Yeah. So, okay. So I will end there. It may seem bleak, and let's hope that the Soyuz, which is about to sink into the Red Sea with 1 million barrels of oil, that somebody talks sense into the Houthis and allows, so that they allow that salvage operation to take place. But the good news in this incredibly tragic chapter that the world has entered is that pragmatism dictates that countries work together on this one thing, and this one thing alone, which is sustainability and climate change. Over to you, Rob.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. I think you've really set the scene for what I'm sure will be a fascinating panel discussion. I'd really like to just very warmly welcome our next panel to the stage straight away, please. So give a warm welcome to Victor Gallas, who is Associate Professor at Stockholm Resilience Centre, Sarah Wamela Andersson, who is Professor of Health and Welfare Technology at Mälardalen University, and Robert Egnell, who is the Vice Chancellor at the Swedish Defence University.
And ja, vi kör på. Welcome.
Warm welcome to you all. I'm going to kick off actually with a question to all of our new panelists as they take the stage here. Can you pick out anything in particular that struck you from Elizabeth's talk? Something that really sparked in your mind? I'll start off with you, Victor, if I can. Quickly. Yes.
I think I just feel the need to add more things to what you said, all these megatrends. I mean, geopolitical tensions, we're going to live in a warmer world, an Earth system that's changing rapidly, a less democratic world, and a world where we actually came out weaker out from the pandemic than we thought. Right? I think that worries me. If we're moving into a future with more crises because of climate change and geopolitical tensions, can we learn from our failures and actually build better? Policymakers love to talk about resilience, but they're really bad at investing in resilience.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're going to come back to plenty of those. Sarah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. What you were talking about is everything is interconnected. So we cannot talk about climate change without talking about geopolitics and global economics. So that's really important. And of course, the next one which comes in is health and security, which we are looking forward to discuss here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Robert.
Well, I really like the couples analogy, which is one way of describing the squabbles of geopolitics. Another one is sort of kindergarten behavior. The problem is obviously that these kids or these couples, they have nuclear weapons as their toys, which spells absolute disaster if things spirals out of control.
Yeah. So our panel here is going to be discussing sustainability and security. And actually, I just wanted to go back to the title of your book, Goodbye Globalization, but it's the second bit that really fascinated me, the return of a divided world. And I think we're going to be trying to talk about, well, if there's something that unites us, could it not be trying to find collaborative ways to deal with sustainability, the challenges of climate change, but also to take the flip side, you know, is actually sustainability in this new geopolitical world going to exacerbate tensions? Is competition for resources going to make things really difficult? So that's really the setup for our discussion. But I want us to take the word security, because perhaps we're making assumptions about what we mean when we say security. Perhaps it's the sort of security, the hard security of conflict. But we also have plenty of other ways of thinking about security. And Robert, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about some of the unpack security as a term and how it's related to sustainability.
Absolutely, but asking a social scientist to unpack a concept is asking for trouble. But I'd like to go back to Andrei's really profound introductory remarks that I found quite moving. And he talked about a paradigm shifts when language collapses. And I think that's in many ways what I feel at this moment as well. That the way we think about the security, the actors involved, the problems we're talking about and how to solve them, we don't even have the language and understanding to deal with that. Traditionally, when we speak about security, we mean national security. It's about defending the nation from external military forces. That's what security is all about, which means that the assumption is that we live in an international society where states squabble or collaborate in alliances, and that is what geopolitics is, right? It's states relating to each other in bad and good ways. But that's a hugely narrow view of what security actually means. And I've always struggled with this, and I've tried to think about other ways, and I've used feminist theory, gender perspectives to try and collapse the idea that there's a public and there's a private sphere of security, which I think doesn't make any sense. But also the concept of human security that moves the subject of security from the nation to the individual and asks, what are the security challenges that we as human beings face? Or that groups face on an everyday basis. And suddenly the sphere of security expands dramatically. And if we look at them just the last few decades, we saw 9/11 happen, and suddenly terrorism and radicalization was clearly part of the security agenda. It really wasn't before that, and we can't even remember that time, right? International crime has become part of the agenda. A pandemic and climate change are suddenly at least part of the conversation, although I think within my traditional sphere, very few like talking about those issues and feel that now they're not really part of the security agenda, although it kills vastly more people every year on a global basis than war does. Not to speak about global health, for example, which we have the expert next to me, which kills in millions and millions of diseases that could be tackled with penicillin and a few health clinics in the countryside globally. But we are focused on the traditional security issues. So we need to think about security in new ways in order to understand the kind of challenges we're currently facing as human beings, as societies, but also how to tackle them. And not to think that the state is both the problem and the solution to these things. It might not be, actually. The state is sort of it's a human construction that has done us quite well for a few hundred years, but maybe it's time for another political construction to tackle the new issues of the world.
Victor, just go straight in.
Sure.
Why not? Yeah,
please.
No,
I just want to second that, and I think that redefinition of what we mean by security is desperately needed. And I'm saying that looking back into the ambitions to securitize climate change. I know there's several experts in the room. Was that a successful move, so to say? And I would say no. I mean, the attempts to securitize global health in the beginning of the 2000s did not pan out well. We were not prepared for the pandemic because of that. The securitization of the Pacific has not made them more resilient to climate change. So I think that track in the way some policymakers have thought about it, and some academics to an extent, I think has been proven wrong. So I think really redefining security the way you're talking about it, Robert, I'm fully supportive of that. It's really needed.
Can I follow up actually on one thing? Because Robert was talking about perhaps solutions being found outside the sort of traditional structures that we currently have. But one area where there are a lot of people have high expectations of solutions around sustainability and climate change is a sort of techno-optimistic set of solutions. Is technology going to be something that's going to help us along, or is it going to exacerbate our problems? Is it going to actually create further security issues?
Do I have 10 minutes? Or?
No, yeah, just sort of a little, let's see, I'll time you.
No, I mean, I can talk about digitalization and AI. I think those are one of the things that I've been looking at. So I see some interesting early applications of this. I mean, to some extent, we will be better at predicting extreme weather events. We might be able to put these tools in the hands of people to allow them to adapt to climate change. But, there's a big but in there. And the big picture is that the innovation model of AI and digitalization is broken. Because what happens is that you have big companies producing big models based on a huge carbon footprint and then letting them out. And then the rest of us need to clean up the mess or the secondary negative effects that we see, whether it's misinformation or hallucination or whatever. We are there to clean up, civil society and researchers. So that innovation model where you just throw things out and everyone picks them up and then we'll see what happens, is not working, right? So will this be good or bad for climate change? I don't know. I think it's too early to say, but the evidence now and the big picture is that we're seeing more harm than good.
And if I can add one thing to AI and what it can do to help us save the planet, one actually quite frightening thing is that is playing out in the insurance industry at the moment is that thanks to AI you can better model climate risk and you can better model where extreme weather events will hit. Well, that means that you will know rather too much about which parts of the world will be too risky to live in. And so in other words, some countries and some regions will become uninsurable. Well, so what does that do? If nobody is available, nobody's willing to insure those countries and regions, what does that mean for those countries and regions? It essentially completely decouples them from advanced economies and from any hope of future development. So I think there's a debate and waiting to be had about maybe we shouldn't want to know what AI can help us know, at least when it comes to the effects of climate change, because if we know that, then some countries are without hope.
I need to hold on to something here.
Well, I shouldn't laugh. Actually, it's very serious.
It's very serious, and I really do want to come back to questions of inequalities. But before we do that, I'd like to bring Sarah in, please, because as Robert was teeing up, health security and the phrase that really struck me during the COVID pandemic, that the World Health Organization, no one is safe unless everyone is safe, is something that is almost also applicable to climate change. And I wonder whether you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about how the disruption that we're seeing in the world is impacting upon health and health safety as well.
First of all, I just want to say that health is going to be the most wanted good. And we know that every child that is born today in Sweden will live 100 years. Most of you will live at least 90 plus years. So that should give some kind of perspective. So in which world are we going to live in terms of sustainability and climate change? Having said that, so health is not in isolation, and we saw that in COVID, that there are certain things structurally that needed to be in place, which we knew about, and we didn't do anything about it until the pandemic broke out. But also there is another thing related to that, that human health is not in isolation from other living organisms. So now there is so much talk about One Health, because we know that with a COVID example, that about 60% of the new infectious diseases come actually from the animals. And we also know that for the last about 30 years, that we have about 30 new human pathogens, which actually related to the 70% being related to the animals, those which live within our houses, but also those outside. So that brings another dimension of thinking of health in a holistic way, but also related to the socio-economic structures that we live in.
You talked about during COVID that we knew we should have been prepared, but we weren't. And then you've given examples of, essentially other ways in which we can expect health disruptions to take place. What should we be doing to prepare now? What sorts of decisions, investments should we be making?
That actually takes us to the theme of this conference, which I really liked. It's about knowledge. We know that knowledge, so the next one is to have the confidence to use that knowledge, implement it in our daily work practices, and then the leadership to lead the change. I think that's really actually what we need, because we have that knowledge, and we need new knowledge, of course, through research, which is really important. But we need to have the courage and the confidence to use that knowledge and lead the change.
Yes.
Since you asked how we can prepare, it really involves every part of society. And in the UK, for example, the government conducted a brilliant exercise involving a pandemic threat. I think it was pandemic flu in 2017. But then, after the exercise had been concluded, it was put on the shelf somewhere, and obviously then COVID struck, and everybody was unprepared in the UK as elsewhere. And I think one of the problems was that nobody likes to think about black swan events or just high impact, low probability events. Is just too depressing. And you, especially if you're the government, and especially if you're elected representatives of the government, you don't want to tell the public about it, because it really is too depressing. And you hope that that event will happen in the next election period or parliamentary period, so that your government doesn't have to tell the public this unpalatable news that there may be a pandemic, there may be various hostile state threats, or indeed not just threats, but forms of aggression, acts of aggression. So it's better, it's easier to just hope they will go away. But of course the price you pay for that is lack of preparedness when it does happen. And one of the challenges is, even for a country like Finland, that prides itself on being very prepared. Finland has prepared itself for territorial invasion. It has stockpiles and so forth to go with it. But the new threats we are seeing, pandemics and other threats and black swan events, is you can barely predict what sort of contingency or calamity it is that will hit you. So land war is just not the only thing anymore. And how do you prepare for those very varied calamities that can hit you? And what do you tell the public? I mean, you have to tell the public somewhere so that we don't repeat the COVID experience, but what are you going to tell them? Will you say, we face this wide range of threats, just bear that in mind, or do you say something more concrete?
We're sounding like a little bit as a Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and things like that.
That was wisdom in unknown unknowns.
I think to some extent it's quite straightforward, especially when we talk about health and climate change. So there was a Lancet Commission, I think 2015 or whatever, said that investing in health systems is one of the best climate adaptation strategies we have. It has so many co-benefits. It's going to be of use for us, whether it's a new infectious disease or a heat wave or whatever. So investing in health systems, I think, is a wise strategy. So there's a need to connect the threads here between climate adaptation and health investments.
I was
just wondering
also, if we can connect this discussion to resilience, Victor and Sarah.
Of course we can.
Because, of course we can. We can always do that. Since this is about expecting something unexpected, and the system needs to sort of be robust enough. Health, as you say, also I guess education in a society, etc. Now the minister is not here, but Victor, nature. So please go ahead. All your best arguments for resilience, and also as to Elizabeth also. The resilience of the globalized world. Hasn't trade sort of found its way, even if we have a less globalized world? So I would like you also to unwrap that. But Victor can start, please.
Okay. No, I mean, of course, resilience for us at the Resilience Center is central. And that is just like a basic observation of the world. The world is changing rapidly. It's a complex, evolving system, and surprise will hit us. And there are certain principles that you can abide to build resilience. I mean, there are diversity, modularity, etc., and learning. And there's a long list of it. The challenge here is like, how do we translate that into policy and to specific policy? Because there are trade-offs. But the thing is, at the moment, is that we're so far away in the way that policymakers think about resilience and invest in resilience that they're not even getting that nature is one of the best insurance that we have to cope with a changing planet, right? So I think just getting through these principles and operationalizing them is what we do. And you need to do it in many systems, right?
You need to make a list of short-term sort of returns for the politicians to tick off in order to, win the long term.
Yeah, and so, I mean that's what my colleagues do every day.
I am sure.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, please.
Yeah, so it's, by the way, how many people here are from the private sector?
Private sector, please, yeah.
Okay, so quite a few. And I think there's an opportunity here for the private sector. Often the resilience debate is framed along the lines of how can we make the private sector pay so that, into some sort of collective fund along the lines of what the Finns do with their stockpiles, but this collective fund for sort of resilience against everything would have to be much bigger. And how can we make companies pay into it, because they clearly don't have an incentive to pay into something that may not benefit them directly. But I think actually this is an opportunity for companies to position themselves. Everybody is aware of all the bad things that can happen. You only need to follow the news for a few days and you realize, oh, we're in trouble. So this is an opportunity for companies to position themselves vis-a-vis other companies, vis-a-vis their competitors. And one company that has done that really well is Maersk. I don't know if there's anybody here from Maersk. Okay, so I'll tell the story of what Maersk did. So Maersk was obviously, as I think you all remember, completely brought down by a Russian cyber attack 7 years ago. And this cyber attack brought down various other Western companies as well, and much of Ukraine. But Maersk went dark for 6 days and only recovered because somebody in Ghana had not turned off his computer. And with his computer, Maersk managed to stay alive. That's how it went, Ghana. And so what Maersk did after that was not crawl underneath a rock and say, oof, this was embarrassing. What they did was instead go and tell the whole world about what had happened to them and what they had learned from the experience and how much better they are positioned they are now and how much better defended they are now. So in essence, the message to everybody out there needing to ship goods, which is all of us, is you can use Maersk because we know what it's like, and now we are extremely well defended against anything that can come our way.
So it's storytelling again, isn't it?
It is. And so I think there's an opportunity for other companies, including ones that haven't experienced any sort of meltdowns like this or haven't been harmed by geopolitical threats or indeed other calamities, to say, look, we are aware, just like you are, we are aware of all these threats, and look what we have done to become more resilient. That means that you can use us, our services, our products, with confidence because we have put these policies, measures, practices in place. And imagine the confidence that would instill among customers and shareholders and prospective customers and shareholders, and even if it means paying a bit more, because you'll be able to use that company with confidence.
Robert.
Yeah, I mean, we always need to think about resilience at different levels, from the community level to the global level. But there's one thing that I think unites them, and that is the importance of trust. At the community level, trust in each other in order to support each other and tackle the challenges we're facing as a small community. At the national level, agencies, public and private actors, etc., but also at the global level. And unfortunately, then, the global level is governed by geopolitics. And we've heard what it looks like in the world. And that means we are currently completely locked in our ability to tackle the challenges we're facing. We cannot, at the moment, say, okay, let's talk for a while about Ukraine or about US-China relations. And after fighting about that, let's put it aside and let's talk about the Arctic and climate change, because that's surely an issue where we can agree on. It doesn't work that way. So we are currently in an international society that is completely incapable of tackling the great challenges of mankind today, which is really troubling.
So how do we reignite, if you like, an interest in engaging in these multilateral forums, in rebuilding, if you like, the trust that they stand for? Because, I mean, at the moment we're in total multilateral fatigue, lots of conflict. The question is, do we find small alliances here and there, or do we actually try and, reignite the more general sort of multilateral approach?
I think it requires a new form of international politics, which means we haven't discovered it yet. So this is sort of spitballing ideas, really. But I think going back to strengthen the existing institutions like the UN and the Security Council, I don't see that happening, because it's based on this interstate logic of geopolitics, which means if it's not happening in the Security Council because of geopolitics, nothing's happening. So I think we need new forums for international, or I'd say global relations between a new set of actors as well. We cannot just allow states to govern the way this world, what happens to this world, but we should think about much more actors. The business sector is hugely important and has more resources than most states even. Civil society actors. Now we've heard the Fridays for Future movement is sort of struggling hugely, but what a movement it was. And if we can engage people on a global level that way around certain issues, that I think would be really important. City actors, the mayors of the major cities of the world usually have much more in common than states do in tackling the kinds of problems we're currently facing. They should be around the table at least and be given a voice. And we previously talked about technology and AI. For me, it's just a force multiplier. Whatever we want to achieve, technology will help us, which means it can achieve destruction for mankind, but it can also be the solution to all our greatest challenges, right? Depending on how we use it. Technology is neither good nor bad. But what I'm pretty sure of, with the little I know about AI, digitalization, is that it will profoundly change the way we relate to each other as human beings. It will transform our societies, how power and resources are distributed, and political loyalties. And that means we have it's very hard to imagine that future and the actors involved in the solutions that we must come up with.
I want to bring some other people in here, but I wonder whether there's a risk of choosing the easy coalitions and leaving the difficult people, or those who are in the most difficult, most vulnerable situations outside of it, because well, they're not living in cities, but they are actually the most exposed because they're in coastal zones. And are we actually solving the problem there by trying to find new coalitions, new places to have these conversations? Sarah?
Yeah, I am more positive about technology and AI, and we've seen so many examples like the COVID-19 vaccine could not have been developed in such a short time without the new technology. So there is so much that we have seen already, but I think we need to go back to the young people who will be doing the programming. Which kinds of values do they have? Which kinds of biases are we bringing into the algorithms that will be giving us answers? So I am very positive about technology and AI, how it's going to transform the way we live our lives and societies, and also contributing to the challenges of climate change. We know that with technology now, we can live actually up to 120 years because it will be able to predict the risk factors which we can avoid and live more healthy actually for a long time, for instance. So we need to think about that. And at the same time, there is so much going on. We shouldn't give up on humanity and human connection. That's what I saw when I was in Southeast Asia last week. That people are really doing stuff related to sustainability, working together with the business community, with the politicians, with the civil society and professionals. So there is so much going on, lots of billions of people who are really doing great work, which we don't know about. Maybe we don't want to know about it. But of course, the global relations are important, but we should not forget that there are local communities really working towards sustainability and better world.
I was going to say, you're right, Rob, that the alliances and intergovernmental organizations that exist today are mostly the result of, obviously, very ambitious efforts after the end of World War II. And there is an opportunity for new alliances to form, especially across the divide, and there isn't very much that unites us across this geopolitical divide anymore, but the climate does unite us. And I wonder if there's also an opportunity, so obviously the IPCC and already does its work, but I wonder if there's an opportunity to add to that, that important work. And there's also an opportunity, I think, for non-government leaders to play a role, because they just don't have the burden of being associated with a particular country's foreign policy. Bill Gates is obviously a fantastic example of that, the work that he has done is doing through the Gates Foundation, which is much more than many intergovernmental organizations have achieved. And on that note, I think what we are entering also an era where non-government leaders are beginning to play a larger role. We saw George Clooney single-handedly change the setup of the Democratic ticket in the US election by writing an op-ed in the New York Times. And I had a conversation the other day, actually before that happened, when Biden was still in the running, but related to who would be a viable candidate. And I said, my conversation was with somebody who was a cabinet minister under George W. Bush. And I said, well, I don't feel like there's anybody who is trusted across the country anymore. And I said, I feel the only person who would be in that category is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he said, no, I don't think he's trusted enough. The only person who's trusted across America is Tom Hanks. So there may be an opportunity for the Tom Hankses of the world.
Opportunity for Forrest Gump to write the rest. Thanks for bringing it to sort of something that's very much of the now, because I mean this year more than half of the world's voters will have gone to the polls, and we're all holding our breath somewhat. Alongside Taylor Swift with the American presidential election. And I'm just wondering, in that context, with many new administrations, some still to be formed, even in the European Union, is this just presenting new uncertainties, or are there particular opportunities that might arise in the next year or two as these administrations take office?
Can we also add the European perspective here, the role for Europe? Squeezed in between China and the US. And what we see now, I'm quite worried about the sustainability agenda when the security agenda is so powerful. And could we do handle both crises at the same time in Europe? Could we find that gem?
What do you say, Victor?
I think in principle you can. right? And I think there are good suggestions on how you can combine a security agenda with a climate agenda.
Can you give me an example that I can believe?
I mean, robust energy systems that are low carbon or no carbon, for example, or supply chain resilience. It's going to be helpful, both for climate change maybe. And. But the thing is that, do we really see that happening? I think what I see happening, and you might disagree with me, is that the whole focus on national security, geopolitical instability is sucking away resources and political attention from the transition we need to do. I mean, that to me is obvious. Another thing, so besides arenas and partnerships and Clooney and whatever, it's money, capital. Like, how do we mobilize the capital to fund this transition, not only here, but also in other countries? That to me is always top of mind when we talk about COP. It's not just only what we get in the agreements, it's also like, who's going to mobilize the resources to support other countries to move to that transition? And loss and damage, I need to mention loss and damage. I know it's controversial, etc., but I mean, it's the right thing to do. That would build trust between the global north and south. If we don't build that trust, other political agents like Russia and China will be there to increase the divide between Europe and other countries in Latin America and Africa. So,
anyone else want to reflect on what the opportunities might be in the coming years?
Well, there's always an opportunity that's just, depending on where you stand on the political scale, that your candidate wins, and you see that as a step in the right direction at least. But I do think the fact that we are so worried about the elections today means that whatever the outcome, there's something wrong. And that these candidates that we are worried about aren't the causes of the challenges we're facing, but rather the effects of societies really struggling in terms of finding an ideology or a common idea of what the future should look like. And that means populism and polarization are the words of today in each of these elections. So yes, the right candidate might win this fall, but I still think we live in the same political challenges for the years to come. And we'll see when we can move out of that. I, for one, think that things will get much worse before it gets better.
Sarah?
I think we need to do things differently from the political level, but of course we have to remember who puts these politicians in power, which is each one of us. And that also reflects what we think politicians and leaders should be. I think we need to go back to each one of us. In terms of Sweden and Europe, when I see the global positioning, so Sweden needs to shift mindsets, and that's what we have seen. Of course, Europe moving away from aid to trade, really meaning trade exchange. That's what China is doing in Africa. Really so many things going on, and they just, rush towards, kinds of trade, which actually Europe has a much more advantage because there are other European values which are much more appreciated than the Chinese values. So there is an empty room there to fill. But I think it's taking too long, as it has to move a little bit much faster. And in terms of science, we need to have the scientific diplomacy around the world, and I think that can also build more trust with, in terms of partnerships, and see how we can move forward.
We've heard a lot about different risks and opportunities in this newly geopolitical world, where we're waving goodbye and seeing globalization in the rearview mirror, and where security and sustainability are rubbing up, and in fact, to some extent, in tension, as well as potentially having the opportunity for collaboration. I want to come down to Sweden. How should Sweden organize itself best to meet the risks, take the opportunities, and perhaps also show some leadership? Any thoughts on that?
Well, friendshoring is happening as we speak, and it's a sort of a not quite friendly undertaking, because the friendshoring that is taking place and will continue to take place and accelerate means that countries will position themselves to become destinations for the manufacturing in particular, and other operations as well, that are leaving China in particular. So Vietnam has been positioning itself very successfully to attract such companies and such operations. But companies will obviously want to come closer to home, and so there are opportunities for us within Europe, within the European Union, and I think in all honesty, the EU is not going to act as one. It's going to be countries within the EU competing to attract that investment, and that's an opportunity for Sweden. Obviously, the jobs that should come back are not the jobs that left. It's not going to be relatively unskilled manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing has changed in the past 35 years. It's much higher skilled jobs, and that's an opportunity for Sweden to position itself if it has the workers or can produce the workers, because that's obviously something that's hugely important in this equation. An example to learn from is Arizona, which has executed the most brilliant friendshoring strategy, reshoring strategy you can imagine. Arizona positioned itself very early on as a destination for chip fabs. And Arizona State University, the state of Arizona, and the Chamber of Commerce worked very closely together, which has resulted in several chip fabs being set up, being built in Arizona at the moment. There's just one catch. And what is it?
Good.
Tell me.
The workers. There aren't enough skilled workers to work in these factories. So if Sweden can position itself as a destination for high-skilled manufacturing, returning from China, and can produce the workers to work in such factories, or can say, we have a plan for how to do it, then that's a fantastic way of benefiting from this very sad development we are seeing at the moment.
Elisabeth, I'm so glad, because Mats Persson, the former education minister, would have been here. He's now the minister for, what do we call, arbetsmarknadsminister, Rob? So why don't we provide him with this excellent piece of advice? I think we should do that, actually. So more skilled workers to Sweden.
Robert, I can see you'd like to come in, and then we've got perhaps one question we'd like to wrap up with.
I know.
Yes, Sweden's approach to this. First of all, we find ourselves in an era of global strategic competition, as Elisabeth sort of beautifully described in her keynote. How does Sweden position itself in this, and what are we competing about? Well, I don't think the winner in this strategic competition will be the one producing the most arms most quickly, but rather the most innovative and flexible society that will be able to transform and tackle the challenges that are thrown at it, but also the opportunities that arise from technology that Sarah highlighted as well. So that should be the strategy, and that means a small country like Sweden cannot just look within its own border and do navel gazing and think we can be the most innovative space in the world alone, but rather also very much look for friends and partners in producing this type of society that we think will lead to innovation and transformation in the future.
We're only a few minutes away from a coffee break.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask the panel the question, but
2 minutes.
2 minutes away. Okay, so you've got about 30 seconds each to ask this last question. But also one you can take away and discuss over your coffee, which is, what are the prospects for progress, given all that we've just heard, both the bleak and the more rosy? What are the prospects for progress over different time horizons, 5, 10, 25 years?
They touched a little on it, so maybe we can start with Sarah and Victor, and then let's see.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I agree with you. We need to invest more in innovations, but I think we forget that we have. We did a big study in region Skåne to look at young children, 6 to 11 years. What do they want to do in the future? It's amazing. So we are talking about technology and STEM. But children, they didn't even see that. So how do we engage children into thinking about the future 10 to 20 years? Because those are the ones who are going to do, the programming, the school technology and everything. But are they there? So we need to interact with them, with children, to see the real world of work and what is expected. So I think that's really very important to include children and young people.
Victor.
I think from from my point of view, I mean, there's so many things you could say, but since we're celebrating Mistra today, I think what inspires me, I do think that there is a change, even though slow, within academia on how we produce knowledge, how we communicate knowledge, how we make sure that it gets out there. And I think that gives me a little bit more of inspiration of that these things are actually going to happen. And it's thanks to funders like Mistra that we're seeing this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Eva, are there any things you want to
No, I just want coffee now. I just want coffee.
Great. I'm sure you all want coffee.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth Braw and the rest of the panel. Thank you. And please have coffee and talk to each other and be back here in half an hour and we will continue. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. And from the buzz in the room, I'm getting the sense that there was plenty of food for thought in our first two panels. I hope you've managed to have a good discussion about those progress points that we might have over the next decade or so. We're going to move now into our third and fourth panels, which are going to really address the issue of leadership. And that's leadership in terms of sort of personal commitment, but actually more than that, it's also the leadership that's required to transform businesses, societies, and enable change at different scales and in different sectors. And of course, we also need to bear in mind the tensions and uncertainties that we were discussing about in our first panels, and the extreme conditions that much of this leadership needs to take place in. And of course, the great urgency that we have to try and solve these challenges of sustainability and climate change.
And as you can see, we have two panels on stage now, and this is actually an experiment. And since Mistra is so brave and has been so brave over the 30 years, we are actually brave even today to see if this works. Maria, here's good. Of course it will work. If you don't win, you learn. With this segment, we will start with Rob, with this panel over here, then me chatting with these guys over here. Then we will bounce some issues in between us. So should we start with presenting our panels, Rob?
I'd love to, Eva. Thank you so much. So think of this as a bit of a fireside chat, but we're going to also play ping pong somewhat in time. Let me introduce this fantastic panel that we have with us today. First of all, in the middle here, David Blood, Senior Partner at Generation Investment Management. Before I present our other panelists, I actually want to give you the chance just to reflect for a second, perhaps a minute or no more, on any insights that really struck you from our first couple of panels.
I think what struck me most on the first panel was the reminder that all of us is really the last generation, broadly speaking, the last generation who has the opportunity to address the challenges of climate change. And we talked about pioneers and role models, and I think Nina made the point that actually it's all of our responsibility, and indeed it is our responsibility, and I think we need to, if we do anything today, is just to go out of here realizing that we have basically 10, 15, 20 years to get it right, and we are the last wall.
And then sitting here next to me, Lotta Lyro, who is President and CEO of Södra. Lotta, can I ask you the same question as well? Any insights, anything that really sparked in your mind?
I was very happy to hear the connection between, there were talks about what are the opportunities for Sweden. We talked about getting high-tech industries back and all of that, and the connection to what are our kids interested in. And I engaged myself a lot in how to get the kids engaged into natural science and mathematics, because that's where it all starts. And I was very happy to get to that connection was highlighted, because I think it's essential in many ways. So thank you for that previous panel.
Fantastic, equipping people for the future. And furthest to my right here, we have Maria Wetterstrand, who is CEO of Milton Europe. Really warm welcome, Maria. Also, what struck you most from those first panels?
There are so many things, but I was thinking about language, and then I was thinking about the, what do you call it when you have an advertisement poster for a newspaper? Löpsedel in Swedish, where you sort of try to make people buy your newspaper. Once there was a winter when there had been a lot of chaotic weather events, and then they sort of gave up on, they didn't have words enough to describe it, so it said, full chaos everywhere. And that's, I think, a sign that when we run out of words, how do we explain these challenges that humanity is facing when we don't have even words to explain, like what happens during winter sometimes in Sweden? Full chaos everywhere.
Full chaos everywhere. Over to you, Eva. Introduce your panel.
And this is Chiara Montanari, and she's a polar expedition leader. One of a very few female ones, I guess.
Yeah, the female are very few over there, but I think it's just historical.
That's just,
as
historical times.
Yeah, historical times.
What do you bring with you from the first two panels today?
These are many things, actually, but what I loved more was about this idea of paradigm shift, and the fact that we don't have the words. And from my experience in Antarctica, I can tell you that this can be also a precious moment, because in this very moment we have the possibility to build something, because this is the moment in which something will be very different.
Like a concentrated moment where things can happen that you didn't believe could happen.
Yes, exactly. So it's a very critical moment, but when in Antarctica, for example, when you have such an extreme situation, you know that every action that you make in that very moment will change the future, will structure the future. So it's an acceleration point, and in this very moment, we can be really effective. So it's dangerous, it's critical, we know, but it's also very precious.
Andreas Lodström, you are the CEO of Beetroot. Beetroot meaning rödbeta, meaning borscht.
Yeah, the main ingredients of the Ukrainian national dish, borscht.
And this company of yours that you founded, when was it? This was a
2012, so we moved to Ukraine to set up a tech ecosystem company, software development, education for impact, working a lot with green tech, education technology, health tech.
And this was during your last year at the Entrepreneurs School of Chalmers.
Exactly. It was actually my master thesis, so I never got a real job. I just had to continue.
An entrepreneur. What do you bring with you?
Actually, a lot of things. I think it was really good, and I think since I think Elizabeth's keynote, as it started to connect to these geopolitical things, had touched me a lot, because it's sort of our reality working from Ukraine, and I kept thinking during that speech that everything is really connected, right? If the world leaders, if you talk about leadership, would have reacted differently when Russia attacked Georgia in 2008. Crimea, like Ukraine in 2014, maybe we wouldn't have the situation with the Houthi rebels that we have here and now today. So
it's
with the
interlinked,
supported with Iran and Russia, and it's so interlinked, and it's so sad that we sit here and when we have this big planetary crisis that I think on paper looks very solvable if we just put our efforts to it, but still we are fighting. We have countries that are committing genocide and ecocide at the same time. Just a few hundred kilometers from here. So,
And Lars Strannegård, leadership. It seems like leadership and culture, what we are talking about today. This is your home yard. This is your playground.
My own backyard. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Well,
when the students come to you, you are the president of Stockholm School of Economics.
Yes, that's right. No, for sure. So I meet the young generation every year. They just become younger and younger for every year that they come.
That's time.
But I think it's really, I think this has been very interesting, so many insights. But I'm really struck by the conversation going on with the young generation and their quest for meaningfulness. And it's just striking that we know so much, we have so much data, we have so many facts, but somehow it just gets lost along the way. And I think that's really a matter of different knowledge forms that I think we have to speak much more about knowledge forms, really, not just the scientific knowledge in itself, the facts and what is fact-based, but without other knowledge forms, we're not going to move, actually. So we have to think hard about that.
We'll touch upon it a little later, so you will have a chance.
Great.
Over to you, Rob.
Thanks so much, Eva. So I'm going to kick off our panel really picking up some of the things that came out in our previous discussion around security and sustainability. There's a lot of discussion around instabilities. Some of those are caused by the sort of paradigm shift that we're even seeing in the way that we produce energy. We're hopefully stopping burning stuff in order to electrify. We also heard about how sustainability is now at the center of geopolitical tensions. David, I'd like to start with you, if I can. In the context of all of these instabilities, how do you, working in the financial sector, how do you balance risk and reward, given all of this uncertainty, political and geopolitical?
Well, before I answer your question, I do need to make a shout out to Mistra. So you talked about leadership and confidence, and when Anna was introducing Mistra a little while ago, they talked about the importance of developing sustainable investing. 19 years ago, Mistra mandated us, they were the first institution to mandate us a $20 million portfolio, which absolutely allowed us to grow and become a very successful organization over the last 20 years. And I think, helpfully, we've been able to help develop sustainable investing. So a big shout out to leadership and confidence to Mistra. I still don't know what they were thinking, to be honest. But it worked out all right. So, Rob, your question is really a great one. Because it talks about the importance or the issues of uncertainty. It talks about the challenges of time frame and risk and reward. And that would be a typical sort of rigorous question to ask of an investment professional. And the problem is that that framework is actually no longer fit for purpose. And that's what I want to try to talk a little bit about. So and there's good news and different news. The different news is that if you assume that finance, broader capital markets, is the engine to help society fulfill its objectives, you would have to objectively evaluate us as actually substandard. If you think about the challenges of climate change, you think about the challenges of nature, degradation, you think about inequality that we're all talking about, we as capital allocators are partially responsible for that. And I think the problem is that we don't have the right information or we don't have the right framework. And so what we're doing as capital allocators is we're allocating capital to investment opportunities, companies, projects, without the responsibility of understanding the impact of our capital allocation. And the challenges with that is that we're ultimately making poor decisions. We are not, the economic term is externalities. We're not internalizing externalities. We're not internalizing the impacts of our capital allocation. And that is resulting in actually poor outcomes. And it's becoming very clear after sort of the 40 years of my experience in finance that we've come to the end of the road. Now, the good news is that finance is not a static concept. It isn't the same forever. In fact, 45, 50 years ago, the whole notion of capital allocation, that risk and reward framework, did not exist. It was actually just take no risk. And so what's happened over the years is that we've developed this risk-return framework and we've tried to execute on it, but as I said, it's flawed. So what we need to do to answer your question thoroughly and actually get to where we need to go is to include impact and how we analyze our investment decisions. I'm not saying that we should forego return, absolutely not. We should not forget risk, but we need to understand the impact of how we're allocating our capital if we have any hope to address the challenges of climate change, nature, or people.
That sounds pretty radical. You're talking about investment with a purpose.
Oh, heaven forbid.
But let me throw it over to someone who sort of works in a business day to day. How would you balance, if you like, the need to generate a profit with all of those externalities and taking responsibility for those externalities? Is that something that you face on a day-to-day basis?
Definitely. But I also want to hijack the opportunity to say something personal, because I think it easily becomes a lot about, it becomes a lot of doom and gloom when we talk about these topics, because it's heavy, right? But as a business leader, I feel it's such an opportunity. And I think we need to talk about the possibilities of leading in this area as well, how we can have impact, how what we do matters, and in order to also send the right signals to the other generations that leader is something you want to be, because it's fun and you can make a difference. So I just want to say that I think for me it's a privilege actually to have the opportunity to do what you're saying, but it's damn difficult. That's the reality. But that's also what makes it fun. And I think it is really the era of both and, because it's exactly as you say. I mean, as a business, it is about making profits, but it's doing that sort of then at the same time achieving the goals of having the right impact, as already been touched on, right? And for us, it's really sustainability or resilience. It's not sort of something on the side anymore. It's it's exactly side by side by our business goals. So as a CEO, I'm followed up by how much profit I generate and the sort of the return on investment. But I'm also followed up on how we reduce our carbon footprint. That's really how I perceive it in reality. And the challenge is, of course, to come up with innovations and with new businesses that actually deliver to both. And I think that is sort of the big thing, right? How do you innovate with that double framework? And I think I'm very happy. We just this summer launched an investment project where we will take lignin. I'm in the forest business, I should say. And 20-30% of trees are made out of lignin. It's what stabilizes the tree, basically. And instead of burning it, which was talked about, that's not what we're going to do anymore. We're going to make products out of it. And that can reduce then the fossil products like plastics and stuff that you could otherwise make out of fossil materials. And the good thing with this investment is that it's a profitable investment, but at the same time it reduces carbon emissions. So it's those types of, that is what we're working with all the time, but it has to fulfill both purposes, otherwise it doesn't really work, and that's the challenge then.
Can I ask a little bit, how sure are you there's going to be a market for this? I mean, it sounds like it's a really big investment, you're making a big bet.
Yes,
here.
yes, of course.
How big a risk is that?
Yeah, no, but of course there is, and you cannot run a business without taking risk. Running a business is taking risk. And then I think what we are doing is that we're trying to sort of establish a value chain. That's how we mitigate the risk. So we work with partners both in the back and in the front of the value chain. And I think that's also a reality as a business leader today. What is sort of a market risk for me in developing that is a supply chain risk for someone else. And what you then need as a leader is the sort of humbleness, I would say, to understand that you depend on others. No man is an island. I mean, that we have known for centuries, right? At least in poetry. But now I think it's in business as well. And that's a mindset thing.
So that interdependence also is about being confident that, along that supply chain, you can rely on the next link to hold.
And build those relationships and that trust and sort of, understand, accept that you depend on others and find sort of ways of working around that.
Maria, I want to come to you. We've talked a little bit about how you find balance between, environmental performance and economic performance in the context of a business. Is that enough? What do politics do?
I think that one of the problems is that we are many companies are benchmarking themselves against their competitors. So they are looking at the competitors and then they find those things where they perform better from a sustainability perspective and then they highlight those. I remember just some years ago, I looked at the websites of different steel companies, and all of them were the most sustainable steel company in the world for some reason. And they weren't lying, they were just measuring things very differently. And the problem with doing that is that you convince yourself so well that you are the best, that you also feel very confident that you don't have to do a lot of new things. Or maybe you will do a few new things, but you won't really sort of benchmark yourself against what the world really needs. So I think that we need to change the way we look at benchmarks, that we should always benchmark the business against a sustainable society. What will be our role in a sustainable society? And look at all these political targets, objectives that are set up for climate change, for example, or biodiversity. You can look at the Stockholm Resilience Center's work, where they go through all these different challenges of environment and see where is the planetary boundaries and all those things, and also the new ways of measuring. And where would we be as a business in that sustainable society? And then you will realize where your real challenges are, maybe. And then you will take action instead of just convincing yourself that you're doing really well. So I think that's one thing. But the other thing is that we really need politics. Because without politics, you will get as they say, the tragedy of the commons. I'm a biologist, so that's a concept that we use in biology, where if you have a free resource, it will be over-consumed because of the way that one person will always gain from using a little bit more, but if they don't, someone else will take it instead. You can see it in fisheries, for example, very easily, that it's like that. So you need politics to set also the boundaries for what businesses can do, because otherwise we will overconsume the world's resources, which we are doing right now. And you can't expect one single company to take the responsibility of not overconsuming resources. That must be politics that will set those sort of limitations.
I wouldn't pass that over to David. Do you agree that politics and regulation is needed in order for you to be able to, have that investment that doesn't look at just the economic return, but looks at the impact that it's having? Or is it enough with voluntary stuff?
No, there's no question voluntary regimes will not work, will not be sufficient. It's helpful to get started, and the reason why I always hesitate to answer your question, the answer is yes, I do completely agree with it. But what I see some of my colleagues in finance do is basically say, right, until we have policy, we'll just do what we are doing. And that's the wrong answer too. So I think we absolutely need policy. It's not so much around mandating impact, although the European Union is increasingly doing that, which I think is quite helpful. It's actually for all of us, in whether it be industry, whether it be civil society, whether it be government, whether that be finance, companies, we have collective roles to play. We need to all be playing them, and we need to be communicating what we need from government in terms of the policy regimes, and there are regimes that we need, but we as capital allocators have plenty to do in the interim.
No need to procrastinate.
We certainly do not need to be procrastinating.
Lotte, I just want to pick up something that came up in one of the earlier panel discussions, which I think Elizabeth was talking about, where there was plenty of opportunity to, reshore, bring innovation back, but there was a gap, and that gap was in the workforce and in the skills that are available. Is that something that you're seeing? And what would you want policy to do to intervene, or perhaps even the world of education and research?
It's one of my favorite topics.
Oh, wonderful.
No, we have a scarcity of talent across our whole value chain. It's everything from the fantastic people that work in our forests with planting trees or taking them down or doing thinning, to the mechanics in our industries and all of that. And as was said in that panel, these are no longer what the jobs they used to be. Someone working in the forest, the decision that he or she takes, it's more than what a pilot takes when running an airplane. It's super complicated jobs, but our kids don't want them. That's reality. And I think I really would welcome a sort of policy to look at supply and demand between what is it that we need as a society in terms of jobs and talents, and what are we training and what are we sort of encouraging our kids to do? I think we are fooling ourselves as a society, and I think we're fooling the kids.
You don't think they can all be influencers?
I don't want to go there, but I will welcome them into the wonderful land of forestry. Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to actually perhaps look at something of a less optimistic side, or something that seems to be happening at the moment, which is we're seeing that maybe some of the transitions, the green transitions that have been set in motion, whether that is in investments in hydrogen or in battery technologies. We've seen that in the UK, big battery factories didn't get the investment required, didn't take off. Some of the hydrogen investments in Australia have been pulled back. I'm just wondering whether you want to say, are we at a pivotal moment in the green transition, and what do we need to do to make sure that momentum isn't lost? Everybody went like this. So David first, and then Maria.
So I think that actually is quite an important question, because it's increasingly on a number of people's minds. And I think we need to take one step back and realize that we are in the midst of the most significant economic transition in history. We are going to transition every one of our industries quite dramatically, transform them. And there will be stops and starts. This is not going to be just a smooth, straightforward journey. There will be stops and starts. Some businesses will be successful, some businesses will be less successful, and that's going to be what's happening. Secondly, the reason why you've seen a fair amount of pushback is there were clearly a series of greenwashing activities. Data was poor. People were actually not doing what they're saying they were doing. And often in my world of finance, it was basically marketing. And so people rightfully have said, whoa, this is not what we think is fair or right. And that's good, because that's bringing more rigor to this conversation for sure. So we think that that's all helpful. But the punchline is, we're on this journey. It is happening. We will be transforming our economies, and us as capital allocators need to understand that and be ahead of that, both from a risk and an opportunity perspective.
Again, we can be confident that the momentum is there. We're moving in that direction, even if there are humps in the road.
And there will continue to be.
Maria, perhaps you want to reflect on that, and
Yeah,
perhaps
I mean,
also with the...
You asked, like, are we at a pivotal moment, I think was your question. And I say, yes, still. I mean, I've been trying to talk about sustainability for about 35 years. And we've said all that time, we said, yeah, this is an emergency. This is really, we really need to act now. And the thing is that we also have acted. I mean, we have decreased greenhouse gas emissions in Sweden and in Europe quite significantly since 1990. So it's not that we haven't done anything. We heard in the panel earlier, I think it was Andre who said that you ask people, did they sacrifice something to save the climate? And the thing is that people actually usually thought that it would be a huge sacrifice. It was around the year 2000, I think, we discussed like the targets, the objectives for 2010 in Sweden. And everyone thought that it would be a disaster. The society would sort of go under, everyone would be unemployed, and all the industry would move to China if we set the target more ambitious than -4%. And then we set that target, and in 2010 we were at -13 or -15 or something. And then you ask people, was it really difficult for you? And they hadn't even noticed. But they complained about all the political decisions that led us there. But in the end, they were quite happy. And they still, I mean, they could feed their kids, and people still lived in the countryside, and the pensioners didn't freeze to death, and all those things that they thought would happen. So I think that sometimes it's also easier than we think, and we should also recognize the things that we have actually done already, the transformation that has taken place. So maybe then we won't be so afraid of the transformation that needs to take place in the future, because it will be okay. We will still be here. I think so, for sure.
Well, we'll certainly still be here, but I'm going to hand over to the next panel over there. We're going to listen into them, eavesdrop on what they've got to say. Over to you, Eva.
And we will continue right there, Maria, because we are in the middle of an ongoing transition. We sit here, all of us, we are in the middle of it. Some of us in very extreme, actually, environments. And I thought we could meet a couple of them and see how they cope and what they have learned about leadership, their own leadership, but also leadership needed for the planet and for the next generation. I would like to start with you, Chiara, and I would like you to, since, I don't know, how many of you have been to Antarctica? Well, it's quite a few.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So many.
Because this is a continent with no, it's the only continent on planet Earth with no permanent human population.
True. Yeah.
You've been there quite a few times.
Yeah, 5 times, and 4 times as expedition leader, and it was different.
Yes.
You know, when
can you just take us
or
there first, Chiara? You know, it's all I can think of is ice and cold, and you know, I can't phone my kids. But please.
Yeah, I can tell you about the most extreme station where I have been, which is Concordia Station. This is an Italian and French station, and it's settled on top of the ice cap. So it's in the middle of the continent at 4,000 meter high, so 4,000 meter altitude. So in extreme conditions, and the temperature there is, the average in summer is -50, and in winter is -80. Yes, I was like that. Like you, my God.
And I mean,
yes,
so high. I
time.
mean, how is the air to breathe? Can you must get used to this?
Yeah, no, I mean, normally I always think, okay, this time I will prepare, and then I don't have time before, because you have to prepare many things before, so to adapt. And so we come directly with a plane from the seaside and from the sea level, and so it's the first thing, more than the cold, you feel the lack of oxygen. So the situation there is extreme, but also is extreme. There are also extreme dynamics within the station, because the station is like, you know, like a spaceship. It is in the middle of nothing. We have to produce electricity, water, I mean everything, all the support for living there and doing research, because of course we have many programs to deliver in very short time, because normally most of the activity are done in summer, during the Antarctic summer, from November to February. And so we have just 3 months to deliver so many projects, of course with the only resources available in the field. And of course we are engineers, so we are very prepared, and we planned a lot in advance, but you know, anytime there is something missing, no matter what, but because of course the logistic to bring stuff there, it's very complex. And so you really have to deliver things in a very short time with what you have. In the station we are 80 people there.
80 people?
And they have very different backgrounds. They come from different nationality, from different areas of the globe. But what is more difficult for me is to manage this diversity, because of course it's not about it's about different nationality. It's about really different mentality, different background. If you have different skills, you have been trained to look at things in a certain way, and it's very difficult to integrate this diversity. And this is actually the job of the leader there. And of course, then we have the environment with a lot of challenges and dangerous situations. Yes. But in the end, what I can bring here is I would like to say it's a good news. And the good news is that when you are challenged so much, and this is very similar, the Antarctic environment is very similar of what we are living now, because we have not one challenge, we have so many challenges and so complex, and you have the impression that you can do nothing because it's too complex.
Overwhelming.
Yeah, you are overwhelmed all the time. You are like that all the time.
That is the
Antarctica.
normal situation.
Yeah, so from the perspective of a human being used to have this kind of situation, I can tell you that in the first place, when you have these big change, that you realize that your plans are gone and you don't know what to do. The experience is like you have your brain. It's like a theater. You have your brain, or the academia, or your academia part that is saying, oh, you have to do that. You have this plan, and we have the backup, and we have this scenario and the other scenario, and so on and so on. And then you have your heart, or your more emotional part saying, oh my God, what's happening? But at the same time, we have the energy, we have the possibility to observe these and stay more centered. So what I'm saying is
like
that the challenge is helping us to detach from our habits and habitual way of thinking, and we have the energy to face this challenge. And I think this is very, very important, because otherwise we are overwhelmed about all these problems and we don't know what to do. So it's important to know that we have the energy to face the challenge.
And now you're talking about us, not the Antarctica.
Totally. I mean, the human being. Yeah. We have this possibility. So we have just to, and the challenge is the chance to find out this possibility in us. Because in our normal, I mean, when we are in a normal situation with no big trouble, of course we go like in an automatic way. We know what to do and so on. So it's easy and it's comfortable. But at the same time, when we have a challenge, and we all experience in our life a little challenge. I mean, life is challenging in our lives.
Thank you so much for reminding us that this situation can actually be some kind of point of action and concentrated energy. And let's do this now. Let's not think so much about other things. We just do it together. We'll come back. But Andreas, I would like you also to take us back in time, and a bit also geographically, but to the 24th of February 2024. We all know where we were that morning. But I would like you to tell us what happened with you that day. Where were you, first of all?
If I may, I want to maybe connect actually here to
the
sort of mobilization challenge.
Yes.
Because, I mean, for me, I remember the weeks before this day as sort of a mix of, is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And it was very, very, we made all kinds of sort of contingency plans, and I was told that I was making panic in the team, and it was very, very, very hard to mobilize people for this war that most people didn't really believe, even though all the signs were actually there that it's going to happen. So on the morning of 24th of February, I was in Western Ukraine, in Ivano-Frankivsk. We had a ski trip with 300 people planned the same day. But we were sort of prepared, but not really prepared. I had an alarm clock at 4 a.m. because I had been told that it might happen that night. So I woke up, went online, saw Zelensky speak, Putin speak. Then you start to see the news channels like bombs in Odessa, bombs in Kiev, and so on. And at that point, I wake up my wife, who is pregnant at the time, who's told by the doctor you shouldn't stress. And it's like, don't stress, but it's happening. And then I started to call. We had 8 offices throughout Ukraine at the time. So I started to call. We had our sort of contingency group, 1 contact person in each office. We went on this big team call, and we sort of put our contingency plan in front of us, which said that everybody should go to where I am or where we are, because it was the most western location we had in the country. And basically during that call, we see like 3 rockets that hits the airport. And I'm like basically turning the computer, and I'm like, well, I don't know if our contingency plan is like valid anymore.
So we heard here, Andreas, sorry, about responsibility. And I mean, I can just imagine the heavy responsibility on your young shoulders, if I may say so, at that point. Now it has passed 2 years, but still, can you leave them there when you go here? How do you cope with this? What have you learned, and how can you sort of take your company further in this situation?
It's a very difficult question, because I think it's been 2.5 years. It's quite a long time, but it still feels that it's sort of, we're in the middle of this, right? It's still, I mean, I have the air alarms on my computer. I'm like going back and forth, and you're constantly a little bit there. But I think one of the things with responsibility and sort of leadership, I guess, we've always built a very sort of trust-based culture and a sort of decentralized responsibility, dividing that among the team. And I'm very happy for that. And also in terms of this mobilization question, like what happens with people when you are faced with like extreme crisis.
Can you now tell us about the slippers?
Yeah, no, but I mean, we have basically, I mean, we came from Chalmers, like student corridors, whatever, like, and then we came, it's like, we're gonna build a company, so we thought, we want to make it like home. We want to build a culture where you come to work and you feel like home. So when you come into our office, you take off your shoes and you put on your slippers and you sort of bring your whole self to work. Like, that's the idea. And then we try to sort of shock people with trust. And when you have 500 people spread out over a country and it's a war and you don't really know what's going on, you don't have really experience of war, what can you do? Like, so basically what I sent, like, but I'm quite happy that I said that actually that morning, was that, because like mentally, I mean, it's like company, whatever, like probably we don't have one, like it's like all about safety. And so what I told is like basically all the company resources are available for any decision that is related to safety or whatever you need to do. And basically there's like $10,000 of cash in each office. Here is where they are located if you need them. And sort of, and of course, like a lot of decisions were taken by me, by us. And if you take that sort of period of, I don't know, first days even, like of the full-scale war, I think there were more decisions taken in the organization than you usually take during, like, I don't know, half a year or a year or whatever. Like, and that's quite interesting because, of course, like not all of those, let's say, 1,000 decisions maybe were great, but the average quality of the decision was quite high. Like, and the fact that thousands of decisions were taken instead of 10, 15, 20, if you would have been running sort of a top-down.
It's a similarity with the Antarctic research station.
Yeah, you have to improvise, and you need the brain power and the decision power of a lot of different people. So I think the leadership in this scenario is about creating the space for people to take.
So in certain environments, we've heard a couple of them, leadership comes, to its best, if I may say so, Lars, to bridge over to you. Yeah. We'll come back to you, Andreas. But Lars, since you are president of a university where you see young people coming in, and you also notice they come out 5 years later, and you have a chance to do something.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a little bit of how we've worked the latest years, and basically, I've been in this position now for 10 years. I'm just starting my second decade now. Yeah. And
it feels good.
It feels good. And what was quite... The thing is that SSE is also a private institution. We only get 16.5% of our funding from the government. And then the rest, and we're not allowed to charge student fees. So we have to find ways of making partners interested in what we do. And we do that through doing relevant research and also providing our students with relevant knowledge and competencies. So just looking at what sort of the genre of business schools. In the world, there are 14,000 business schools. Basically, in every single organization, not just private organizations, there are people educated at business schools. And the decisions that they take in terms of sustainability have not been very good, right? I mean, you could just look at all the curves and all the data coming out from, Resilience Center or wherever. So obviously, things have not been done in the right way. And then we try to listen to basically so many of the stakeholders that we have, like the 110 corporate partners that we have. And very many of them were talking at the time about the need to understand sustainability. And the fact is that, as we know, politicians are not doing enough, Maria. And obviously, we need, David, the politicians to do more. But as I see it, a lot of sort of push is coming from the private industry. And the fact is that if we are educating people who come out into the job markets and do not understand sustainability, the fact is that they will not get the jobs at the McKinseys and the Morgan Stanleys and the Goldman Sachs or at the insurance companies that Elizabeth was talking about. If you don't understand what's happening with global warming, with the increased extreme weathers, etc., you are going to do a lousy job at that insurance company. So basically, we decided to focus our research on number one, sustainability issues, because that is what's needed. So we have our Center for Sustainable Markets, the MISUM, as we have. And then the fact is, you have to think in new ways in order to solve the sustainability issues, and hence we set up the House of Innovation, because you need new ways, new solutions, basically, and that's one of the largest initiatives in the history of our institution. And on top of that, you need to look at finance in different ways. So we have the House of Finance, which basically is about how the financial systems work, how valuations occur, what sustainable finance is all about. And then finally, the fourth area is within organization and governance, because these problems cannot be solved within the frameworks and within the borders of existing organizations. So you have to think in different ways. So this is how we sort of structure our research. And then on top of that, how do you actually get this into the heads of the students who are then the future leaders? Well, we thought, first of all, that we're an academic institution. We cannot tell them to be sustainable, think sustainably. If that was sort of part of what we were doing, then that would be paternalistic and non-academic, basically. So it has to be intrinsic. It has to come from another perspective. So we found this wonderful phrase by a Swedish philosopher called Ingmar Hedenius, who said, "The one who's best prepared for the future is one who is free and alive in relation to the unknown." And basically, it's a poetic phrasing, but it's also very capturing, because unknown, yes, that's for sure where our world is. And if you then are free and alive, it actually means that you are moving in this world where you don't understand everything, because you cannot foresee, the risk management tools that we have. You cannot sort of foresee that Russia was actually going to invade, right? But still, that's what you need. But then you have to generate hope. And that's what that means, that you're alive in that world, sort of, that you have faith that it's possible to do something. So we thought the very idea of free is what we needed to install. And that served as the acronym for the educational mission that we have given ourselves. So the F stands for a fact and science-based mindset. You cannot be an academic institution, and you cannot move into the world being a decision maker without being fact and science-based. Even more important in this world, not needless to say in this to this audience, right, with fake news and alternative facts.
And the R is?
The R is reflective and self-aware. The E is empathetic and culturally literate. And because being empathetic is entrepreneurial, right? So actually having this combination is something that we try to install. We work with this in several ways, of course, by courses through the fact and science base, but also by introducing, for instance, art and cultural expressions, because that's a way of using other types of knowledge.
And we heard you when you had your Sommar i P1 talking about that. So all of us that understand Swedish.
So I don't need to say anything more, you mean?
It was my way of. No, Lars, it's super interesting, but it's my role now to sort of bounce over to Rob's panel to get some thoughts from that panel on what we've just discussed, with urgency, with uncertainties, and with leadership, and when it comes to the personal commitment we've heard about here. So thank you for now, and over to Rob.
Thank you for bouncing it over here. And I'm actually going to start with Lotta, who I saw nodding quite vigorously as Andreas was talking about the sort of incredible stress that he and his company were under, and making multiple decisions, but also perhaps decentralizing those decisions. You were nodding vigorously, so perhaps you've got something personal to say. Perhaps you also want to talk about how this relates to your leadership now, but also your experience in the past?
No, but the reason I was nodding is that I think leadership at its essence is about setting free the sort of the possibilities of the human being, right?
Yeah.
That is what leadership is about. I mean, you don't do the job yourself, it's about creating preconditions for others. And I think that is what you're talking about, the possibilities of the human being and how to set it free. And how can we do that without these extreme circumstances then? It was the same during the pandemic, right? I was in another company then, but the amount of decisions that we took, the innovation that we implemented in order for people to shop at Clas Ohlson at that time was just incredible, right? But how can we do that not during a pandemic or during a crisis, but that is, I think, the challenge. So that's one reflection. Then the second thing is, I used to be a student at Stockholm School of Economics.
See what happens.
Exactly. See what happens. And I didn't get any of the good stuff that the students are getting now. But what I do think is important, we who are now in these positions now, we still have the possibility to be curious and consciously incompetent. I think that is a key word here, right? To sort of be curious about what is it that I need to learn. I went to Stockholm Resilience Center myself to learn because I got nothing, right, at school. But that doesn't mean that I can sit back and say, no, I didn't get it, so I'm just going to ignore it and continue to work and make bad decisions. That is irresponsible. So I think it's also about being curious about yourself. What is it that I need to learn in order to master this situation, right? So
remember, Lotta went to SSC a very long time ago.
Exactly. Before your decade, Lars. Yeah.
I want to pick up something
about
the sort of, Chiara was talking about this sort of extreme environment, the spaceship-like habitat that you have, and how that sort of stimulates solutions and innovation. And I wonder whether you wanted to talk about what is it that we need to make sure that we are innovating to solve?
I think that's proven also when it comes to business economics, actually, that if you have the restraints or the critical emergency situation actually makes companies innovative. And I think as a policymaker, that's important to remember, because sometimes when you want to regulate businesses, or you want to put a price on carbon, for example, which is always very difficult because people will be angry that it's more difficult to buy petrol or whatever. But anyway, so when you do those things, what you create is actually a direction of the innovation that is happening. And you will see a lot of things emerging from that. So you can hear companies saying that, you know, you can't tax us, you can't make us pay for carbon, because that means we will have less money for innovation. You hear that now, for example, with the aviation industry. That's what they are saying, because then we can't invest in this and that. But the fact is that all history shows that when you get that kind of economic restraints, that's when you get innovative. It's not that you get the money to keep them, it's when you have to pay for the emissions, that's when you get innovative. And if it was true that the lack of taxation would create innovation, the aviation industry the problems would be solved already, right? Because they haven't paid anything for the emissions for the last couple of decades. So
give them a tough environment. Can we bounce that back to Andreas, maybe, about this environment for being an entrepreneur and setting up, I mean, teams and be innovative? In terms of what Maria just said about, you know, when your resources get like a frame, strained. What would that actually encourage you to be an even better leader for the company also?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tricky point here is how do we create. I mean, COVID was one such situation we kind of all experienced. The war for us was an even more extreme. And while, I mean, the facts of the crisis itself these are really horrible things, but it's something very, very fascinating with the sort of power that comes in the organization. And to be honest, I don't have the answer, because it's like it comes this sort of boom, power, and then sort of things are gradually normalizing. And I don't have the exact answer of how to create that sort of external stimuli internally in the organization. It's actually one thing that I'm like struggling with and thinking like how, of course you cannot live under the level of stress you have in an organization during a long time But still, I mean, the fact that you during like just a few weeks, if it's like the first month of COVID or the first month of full-scale war, like the fact that when you look back at your organization, like a 12-year history, is like when was the most innovative periods of time that those were the crisis situations. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Maria is right. Maybe. But maybe. But it's tricky. It's a tricky question. Like, help me.
Can you, as a leader, become a problem for innovation? Even can you sort of hinder innovation? I would like that one to Lotta as well, since I expect that, I mean, innovation takes place when we don't have we do not go to the board with exact results every quarter, etc. We have some kind of space that is sacred for this. But Andreas, you might also have a thought of that. Otherwise, I bounce to Lotta first, and then you can think about it.
No, I definitely think you can be a problem as a leader, and I think it sits very much in how you act when people fail, what questions you ask, what you encourage, what you see, who you see. So because as a leader you very much shape the culture depending on how you act, and the culture is what will sort of allow certain things to happen and certain things not. So definitely.
But definitely also constraints foster innovation. It's like you say. I mean, it's like that old story about the dance teacher who was saying to the group, dance, free dance, do anything, be creative. And the group was just standing completely still. No, what do we do? And then she painted a ring on the floor saying, okay, now you have to have one part of your body inside that ring. And then all of a sudden, the most creative moves started to occur, where they had their head in it and their knee in it. So that's sort of it proves Maria's point.
Andreas and then Chiara.
No, but I think, I mean, a common problem we have as leaders and entrepreneurs that it's sort of you take too much space, right? You sort of try to drive the agenda and so on. And of course, I think one of the key aspects of actually having the team is to give that space, and that's not always as easy as it sounds, right? But one actually good thing is to I mean, we were quite young when we started this company, and we were new in Ukraine. We didn't really know the industry. We didn't really know anything. So the only thing we had was really like, we have this vision of impact that we want to reach, and we need to attract people that are smarter than ourselves. So one thing I try to sort of have in my mind is like, while I'm like as a leader responsible for some kind of direction, vision of the company and so on, in the end of the day, there should always be, if I built a strong organization, there should always, on any given question, there should be someone in the organization who has a better answer than me. If we have an organization of that means that we built, an organization of strengths that is way beyond your own skill set.
Over to you, Rob.
Yes, I wanted to ask David a couple of questions. I'm going to start actually off with what Lars was describing about how he's put in place a framework that allows the students to really sort of embrace and understand and work with sustainability, not because they're told to, but because they see the value in it. And I'm wondering, you've been in the business of sustainability, the finance of sustainability for, is it 20 years now for Generation? Also a birthday, perhaps. But what would you, is this the future? Is this the future you need for the next generation of leaders within the finance sector?
Well, I think it's what we collectively need for our economies and our businesses, absolutely, yes. And the important point that I guess I want to add to this is that sustainability isn't something different. Sustainability is understanding how businesses and markets operate with a full understanding of how the systems and holistic economies operate, and understanding that climate change, nature, human challenges are all interlinked and are becoming increasingly interlinked. And so we just need to have that mentality. But I would hate it if, and I know they don't, this is terrific, but a lot of institutions basically say, well, we have our normal curriculum, and then we have this extra sustainability course. Exactly. That's not good. It has to all be integrated into how we think about running economies, businesses, and capital markets.
Can I just? I've got one more that I.
But they
okay,
want
no,
to
okay,
come
they want to come in. Yes, splendid. Right. I throw the ball over there.
Lars, and didn't you also move your hand, Chiara, before?
Yeah, no, but it was about the crisis.
The dance and
it
the ring.
was about innovation and crisis and this relationship. Actually, I'm not asking for crisis to come, for example, but from the Antarctic experience, I can say that the value of a crisis is just that it allows us to understand that we are free and alive. And this is very important because we are living in a world that is made of a system, and the system, of course, is not working anymore because of it's creating so many problems. But the system is just a structure, and the structure has been there just for historical reasons. But the important thing is to understand that we are now free from deciding something different, to move in another way. But the big challenge
what the crisis
for us
can do to us.
The crisis is challenging our habits, our way of thinking, our way of even thinking reality. I mean, for example, in Antarctica, first I had to do with to myself and then to the team, because of course I'm working within a team. I realized that I was not capable of dealing with all this challenge because I have done the old schools. So I had to go back to school and train myself in complexity thinking, because the problem is that I could not understand complexity. I had this reductionist view of the situation, so of course I could not work with this challenge. And then we had to do within the whole group. So what the crisis is making to us is to make this understanding clear.
And new knowledge is important.
And yeah, the knowledge and the
over
the
to
experience.
Lars quickly, Andreas quickly, and then over to Europe.
No, it's okay. I was just saying, I think it's so very true that, I mean, to have specializations within sustainability is really the wrong way to go. But it's all a matter of actually, I mean, being sort of true, of course, to your academic discipline in one way or the other, I think is necessary. But the blinders that we all have, especially in this part of the world, since our education programs are so very specialized. We need to really widen those all the time in order to understand the context much more.
Yeah.
And there's no other way than doing that.
Thank you. And Andreas?
I have a little bit of a dilemma in my head about some of the things. I mean, on the one hand, I was saying myself that you need sort of this external stimuli to get shit done, right? And maybe regulation to some extent can be that in some cases. At the same time, I think, you know, when you run as an entrepreneur, when you run a business and sort of European Union level or whatever, there's like more and more and more regulation. And often, I mean, that pushes to actually a very hierarchical structure, because usually as a CEO or a founder or an owner or whatever, you have all the responsibilities. So I think over-regulating everything also has a tendency of killing the sort of freedom of sort of non-hierarchical organizations and so on. So it's not maybe, the dilemma is maybe not sort of the tax level in itself or something like that, but just the amount of sort of responsibility and also legal responsibility that goes into. So I don't have the answer, but that's the dilemma, right?
It's certainly a big debate at the moment after the Draghi report came just a few days ago.
Right.
Is red tape killing all of that sort of innovation?
Exactly.
Lotta?
No, I very much agree, and I sit exactly in the middle of it. I think it's really, there are areas where we really need politics, but I think it should really be evaluated based on that we cannot solve it ourselves. Because otherwise we will kill the power, the initiative, the innovation that the human being sits on. And so I completely agree to that.
Can I just add to that metaphor that I was saying about the ring? Sorry for bringing this back to dance. If you see legislation as, you know, where you actually paint a box on the floor, there are the boundaries. That's what you have to do all the time. So then you're actually able to have one part of your body in terms of regulations inside, and then it also fosters innovation and creativity at the same time. But if legislation instead is a number of boxes, right, being spread out on the floor, then it becomes really complicated and you become sort of stiff. So you need to really think hard about how you actually think inside the box in that sense.
It sounds like that crazy game Twister.
That's exactly
what you're describing
there. Exactly it.
But I wanted to ask Maria, you know, is it actually there's too much red tape or the wrong type of red tape?
I mean, for the sake of debate, I will say no. I mean, of course, there are some barriers. I mean, the waste regulation, for example, is putting barriers to circularity, and it needs to be adjusted. But I mean, you can find those areas where there are obvious that there are some barriers to taking steps in a sustainable direction. So I won't argue against that. But it's also my experience that business is always saying that it's a problem with regulation and taxation and everything. And the organization, the Confederation of Swedish Industries, have opposed every environmental regulation that was ever imposed, more or less. They have opposed every environmental tax that was ever imposed. And they have always said that the wolf is coming to eat us now. This is the time when the wolf is coming. And after a while, as a politician and policymaker, I'm not that anymore. It was 13 years ago, but I still identify, a little bit with that. You tend to stop listening after a while, especially when you've seen so many times that just a few years after, they will boast about all the sustainability measures that they took and how well they have performed with things they would never have done if there hadn't been that regulation or that tax. So I think that you need to put that into perspective as well. So of course, I understand that it is a bit complicated, the CSRD, a lot of difficulties for companies, but if you wouldn't do it for everyone at the same time, it would be super difficult for anyone to get that done also. So you have to weigh these things, both you should listen with just half or maybe a quarter of an ear to those complaints, and then you should also try to remember that the non-action is also very much of an action in this case, because if you don't take action, business as usual is not an option. It's not an option because we are moving in the wrong direction. So non-action is also an action. We need to remember that, and that goes for business and for policy and for academia and everyone. If you don't do anything, you will get into trouble because you're not acting as well.
That's also the case for being a moderator of this discussion. So non-action was not an option anymore. We need to conclude. It's very, very sad to do that, but we will continue the discussions over the mingle and the glass a little bit later. What a fantastic discussion, and I'm so glad that you came with all your different perspectives and angles and adding this, all those perspectives to leadership. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
It's time to welcome three of Mistra's researchers and research leaders. And with help of them, we will conclude this afternoon with some insights in what they are doing, but also looking ahead. And they are just receiving their microphones right now. Rob, do you mind? You can chit-chat a bit. It's just nice to give them a break.
Sorry.
No problem. So, they are coming in a minute, Rob. Perhaps we could just, I would like to hear from you. What was unexpected today?
What's unexpected today? I suppose it's actually, I think the thing that was unexpected was that despite perhaps some of the bleak things that we heard during our second panel, that actually this panel, there was a huge amount of energy and opportunity in the constraints and maybe the challenges that we're facing, and that our ability to react to those and to employ the Antarctic mindset, to use the innovation power that Lotta described, and also to make sure that we're not procrastinating, that we are doing things, And I personally think that also what Maria ended with, I mean, there is a significant, increasingly important role for the public sector to play, for regulation to play, to stimulate that innovation as well. So I think, I mean, maybe not unexpected, but perhaps also, you know, something that balances out some of the more challenging aspects of our current situation.
Thank you. This is Helena Hansson. She's the program director of Mistra Food Futures, and she's also a professor of agricultural and food economics at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU. Welcome.
Hi.
And this is Caroline. No, sorry. This is Helena. How could I? This is Helena Hansson. Should I do this all over again? No.
It's fine.
It's fine. You're on the top there. Carolina.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
You are the program director of Mistra Sons.
Yeah, the deputy.
The deputy.
Yes.
Yeah, but today you are the program director. And you're also at the Swedish Road and Transport Research Institute.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
EVL. Okay.
No, VTI.
VTI.
Yeah.
This is EVL.
This is EVL.
IVL.
Hello.
This is Lars Zetterberg. And you're the program director of Mistra Carbon Exit.
Yes.
And your voice is a little bit destroyed from a normal cold that is over and done with.
We're just recovering from a
yes,
cold.
But you have a very interesting voice.
Yeah,
we'll
I think
keep
so
you
too.
to the end. So we will start with Helena. And we've asked those three persons to give some reflections from their programs, from the perspectives of your research programs. So please, Helena, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. So, I'm a bit biased, of course, but I would like to bring food into the whole discussion. Food and agriculture represents about 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. If we look, and that is the whole food system activities. If we look at only agriculture, we are down to about 23–24%, depending a bit on how you count. But that means that what we consume, our diets, and also how we produce food is really, really a cornerstone of the whole transition of society towards sustainability. It's also linked to a whole lot of our own health, which is also part, of course, of sustainability. So that's one point I really, really want to make today. Food is at the center of transitioning societies. Then I also want to sort of tap into this discussion about sustainability and geopolitical tensions. And we all know that after the invasion of Ukraine, societal discourse started to shift towards more of how do we create preparedness. And in the food sector, people all of a sudden started talking about preparedness with respect to food. How do we make sure that we have enough food available if our borders would be shut off, for instance? One perspective we have been working with in Mistra Food Futures and also in other research that I'm involved in is that we need to think about sustainability, transition and preparedness at the same time. And as we transition towards sustainability, we also build systems that are, well, that have better preparedness because these systems are resilient. And also from a simple society, or even not simple, but from a societal perspective, wouldn't it make sense, you know, to think about how do we transition towards sustainability and better preparedness at the same time, to avoid that we threw in a lot of public funding, for instance, into policy processes that perhaps only creates problems for something else, instead of kind of killing two birds with one stone. So that's one point I want to make. I also want to bring up this about heterogeneity. We talk about policies, we need information, we need to educate people and so on. But from our research, it's also quite evident that people are different. So even if, for instance, environmental identities, so identities more in line with the sustainability transition, is driving these decisions, we also see from research that there is great heterogeneity both among consumers and among producers. And this is quite important to think about to avoid that policies create polarization and that we kind of build even more polarization. To think about how policies can create bridges between people that are sort of strong proponents for environmental policies in relation to those who are less strong proponents. And I also want to tap into the very first keynote we had here today about how our discourses, how we talk about things. And it's quite evident, I think, also from what we heard today, that simply providing information, thinking that if people only know, if consumers only know exactly what food they would purchase or exactly how they would transport themselves, that will not be enough. We cannot really believe in simple information provision as a source for transformation. We need to think about how we can work to actually achieve behavioral change much more in depth than simple information provision can provide. And me being an economist, that is a bit tough to say, because we tend to believe that with new information we update our preferences and behave accordingly, but that's not the case. And then finally, rounding off, I would like also to emphasize that we really need to think about several aspects at the same time. We cannot only think about climate or only biodiversity or only health or only the profits of companies. We need to think about this all at the same time. So sustainability of the food system, for instance, is really about healthy foods. It is about production that doesn't sort of impact on climate and biodiversity in a negative way. It's about having businesses that can be resilient over time and be able to produce over time. So I was really happy to hear now in the final panels about businesses for several purposes. I think that is really where we need to go. And this is difficult, and we need to really allow ourselves to think about several things at the same time.
Thank you so much, Helena, and a nice bridge, I think, to Carolina.
Thank you, Helena.
Thank you.
I've been working in a program called Mistra SAMS, Sustainable Accessibility and Mobility Services, for 7.5 years. And I mean, we focus on transport, which is also a third, if we only count the emissions in Sweden from our transport systems. And this is also known as a quite tricky sector to change. So it's a bit related to food, I think. We also know that technical developments are really important, but it will not be enough. So it gets quite political and wicked and tricky to work with in that sense. But what struck me today is that this is actually a sector where we have already started to come up with some new framings and new concepts and new language. So in Mistra SAMS we have been careful to focus not only on mobility but also on accessibility. And the point is that what we need as humans and as society isn't transport. What we need is access to things. And with that concept, that opens up also for new ways of seeing how we can work with transport issues. So, I mean, if we think about it as a matter of access, then we can accomplish that with not only transport, but also with land use that increases spatial proximity, for instance. But that also is, we can also work with digital services as a way to, perhaps you don't at all need to travel to get access to what you need. So with that, that's an example of a new concept that really opens up new ways of thinking and new solutions as well, I think. And after this afternoon, it was amazing with the discussions and the panels. And I think we really should focus quite a lot when we think ahead about transformation and transformative capacity. Because there are bits and pieces here that are really important if we as a society will be able to move towards a more sustainable state and sustainable pathways, especially in sectors where it gets tricky and political and where there are different values at stake and so on. There's a lot of research about transformative capacity. I would like to highlight 3 things that are important in the transport sector, based upon a German researcher called Katharina Hölscher. So, I mean, if we are about to develop a stronger transformative capacity as a society to reduce the negative climate and sustainable development effects from the transport sector, we need to be able to identify and unlock the structures that hinders us to move towards more sustainable development pathways. There's a lot of physical structures, of course, but also mental, the ways we think, the language again. And one example is that we still continue to plan for increased car use in our planning systems today, even though we know we shouldn't do that. That's a fact. And that's about the methods, the analytical tools we have that continues to create that kind of inertia. So identifying those structures that hinders us is really important. Secondly, it's important to continue to imagine, discuss, develop alternatives, test and learn from them. That's something we have been doing on our research program for the last 7.5 years. And I mean, that's also something that is quite common in Mistra programs, to test and try and learn. That's really important. And that's being done a lot today, I think. But I think the tricky thing is to make sure to link the lessons learned into the systems and structures that, the ordinary practices of decision making. And the third thing is really the need for some kind of orchestrating force. The capacity to put things together, to link between sectors, to formulate and drive common goals and strategies forward. That also links to the panel on leadership, of course, and political leadership, which is extremely important. And we've been doing interviews with politicians in Mistra Sams, and I think what is important to stress perhaps is that as soon as one says political leadership, you can easily imagine like a political champion or something. But I mean, political leadership is it's relational. So political leadership requires relations with us as citizens, business organizations, other political parties. Of course, I mean, that's obvious, but I think it's an important thing to think about. And for politicians within the mobility field, it's also quite clear that even though it's difficult when things get controversial and conflict-loaded, it's also potentially a source of political energy. So it's important to sometimes also get down to the values that are at stake. And that's also, I think, something that is important for us as researchers, that some things we can find out scientific answers to, but many things here are also about values and ethics and so on. So yeah,
I think so
that's
much, Carolina. Great.
Thank you.
Great bullets there. And over to you, Lars.
Thank you so much. Okay, so actually, I should start by saying happy birthday to Mistra, and I've been actually involved in different Mistra projects for the last 20 years. So it's a bit of a celebration this year as well. Currently, I'm running this project called Mistra Carbon Exit, where I've had the opportunity and fortune to work with some really good scientists. And so I'm going to share some of these findings with you about the green transition. And so one of the things we thought about when we started the project in 2017 was that we will have to be seeing this transformation occurring while the program is running. And it has actually happened. So now we pretty much are seeing the transformation which is going on right now, mostly in the energy sector, where we're seeing a massive implementation of renewables. The price of solar cells have dropped dramatically, and now it's actually, for me as a private person, it's a very good deal to put panels on my roof and sell electricity from solar, so that's quite incredible. Well, we know pretty much what technologies will bring us to this a low carbon future. So it's going to be the transformation of the energy system. It's going to be electrification in industry and in transports. There's going to be a certain part of renewable fuels still being used, mainly for aviation, we think. And there's going to be some element of carbon capture and storage. So that's the first one. The second thing is that we've looked at costs. And surprisingly, the cost for the society is very low for this transformation. The problem is that for some actors, for instance, the ones that are producing green steel or intend to produce green steel and green cement, those costs are significant. But if you go down the supply chain and look at the cost increase for the consumer, it's marginal, it's hardly noticeable. So in other words, cement and steel, green cement and green steel are expensive, but the cost increase for the apartment or the car is marginal.
That's good news.
That's very good news. And the third good news is that industry is on board this transformation. Well, actually, they are driving the transformation because there's a green tech race going on, not only in Europe, but in the United States and in China and the rest of Asia. So they're competing to develop these green technologies because they know that they can win market shares from these technologies. And if they don't do it, there's sort of, if they are sitting on fossil technology in 15 years, they'll be out of business. So all these good news are good, of course, but if we look at what's actually happening, the progress is quite slow. Apart from the energy system, if we look at Sweden, emissions in industry have only gone down with 25% in the last 35 years, and in transportation, I think it's 28%. So we have still a long way to go. And so why is this going so slow? Well, the simple answer is that it's been cheaper to continue to pollute. And the reason is that this, the social cost of carbon, this externality, has not been included in the business cases for industry up until now. But this is about to change. The EU launched last year a very ambitious climate package, Fit for 55, and just before shortly after it was communicated, but before it was implemented, we saw the price of emission allowances soar to above 100 euros per ton. And that's very important because at those prices, these green products, green steel, green cement, is actually competitive with traditional materials. So it's really important that this policy will continue and sort of I'm sure it's going to drive this transformation, but it's also sad to see that in Sweden the Swedish government is actually rolling back important policies, mainly in the transport sector, but also they're making it more difficult for wind power, for instance. And I think the reason for this is that they're afraid that they're going to lose voters, and we'll have these yellow vest demonstrations that we saw in France a couple of years ago. But when we do investigations on people's attitudes, we can see that the majority of Swedes and Americans and everyone we've tested understand that climate mitigation is important and that's a cost that they have to take. So they're willing to do these sacrifices. Not everybody, but the majority. And I think for those that are not convinced, I think there's a need for, and of course there's a dilemma here, because the politicians that implement climate investments, they have to bear the cost, or their citizens have to bear the costs, while the benefits come in later mandate periods. So it's like somebody said earlier, it's so easy to push these decisions ahead and hope that somebody else will take them.
We are back in time, aren't we? The discussion of time that we started this.
Yes. But and about time, I think it's important that we need to do some storytelling. We need to explain what this low carbon future looks like, because I'm convinced it's not going to look very bad. We're going to be living lives pretty much as we do now. We're going to be living in houses that are made of concrete and steel and wood, and we're going to be going to work in buses and cars also. We're going to, go and see our grandparents on weekends, and we're going to have drinks with friends and dance in places like this. So life's going to be good, and we're going to actually have more leisure time to enjoy these things. There's a couple of things that have to change, and we've talked about food, so that's definitely going to have to change. not dramatically, maybe back to how we were eating in the early 70s. So less meat and more vegetables. It's not, you know, we're not going to have to go back and live in caves, but it's just we're going to have to compromise on some things. And another thing is the overseas travel, of course. So not going to Asia for holidays, but reduce that. So, but apart from that, I don't think things are going to change very much in this more positive future.
Let's continue the discussions over the mingling. But thank you so much, Lars, Carolina, Helena, for summarizing this from your perspectives. And let's also emphasize that there are so many more Mistra researchers here today that you can talk to during the reception. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome up, Anna. We can go there. Huh? Anna, it is time to conclude and to say welcome to the mingle. But I know that you have also a few things you would like to say before that.
Yes, thank you, Eva. I really hope we're going to be able to dance in the future. This is a dance palace, jazz palace. So there will be music, there will be literature, there will be good food. And I think there is a future, really. So this afternoon is about to end. And personally, I feel both humble and proud of being representative of Mistra. But I also feel a sense of urgency. That's clear that we need to act. We need to change how the society actually is organized. 25 years ago, I was a program manager for a Mistra program called Vastra. That was a program focusing on sustainable water management. It was a program where political scientists, by the way, we have one actually here, Victor Galas, you were a PhD student in that program a long time ago. Political scientists, economists, biologists, agronomists, modelers, and we all worked together. And we also arranged stakeholder dialogues. We talked to stakeholders about acceptance of measures. And I will never forget the discussions, the heated discussions that took place in these stakeholder groups with researchers and farmers and people from the government. They were all living in the area of Rönneå, and they continued into the hot summer nights. And I remember the inspiration that the stakeholders felt when they understood and realized that their knowledge and their experience mattered. I think it was Lars that mentioned knowledge. It's not only research, it's knowledge in a wide perspective. After the program ended, I saw it with my own eyes, how this information, that knowledge that we developed in the program was implemented at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, where I was head of scientific department. The stakeholder dialogues, the models, we used all over Sweden in planning in the catchment areas. I think that this captures the uniqueness of Mistra. Research and innovation in close dialogue with the stakeholders and the users of the knowledge in society. I see many of you in this room that contributed to Mistra's research. It's a privilege to be part of this community. I feel really happy to be part of that. The challenges are great. That's no doubt. But I feel confident that we can make a difference together. In order to speed up the journey towards the future, this year we have made 2 special calls at Mistra. The first one is called Mistra Challenge. It's cutting-edge, brave, bold projects focusing on 2 themes. One is green diplomacy, and the other one is circular economy and how to accelerate that and how to use less resources. The second one aims at fostering the next generation of environmental research leaders. And an invitation was sent out this week to all universities in Sweden. Finally, I'd like to thank all excellent inspirational speakers. It was really a thunderstorm in my head. Someone said in the beginning, it's really getting hot up here. They gave us insights and also encouraged us to act and take responsibility. And yes, Andri, Schnar, Magnusson, we need to become better at telling stories. The 2 fantastic moderators, you must be really tired now. I'm not. Thank you so much, Rob and Eva, for moderating this event. So inspirational. And also, yes. And also the employees at Mistra, you are all over the place and you've been working really hard. You've been working for a long time to make this event happen. A special thank you to Malin Lindgren, the project manager, and Linnea Kasmo and Jessica Berg. Thank you so much for all the hard work. And also thank you, Nalen, the National Palace of Dance, for hosting this event. Now we invite you all to share some food and refreshments to celebrate Mistra 30 years. Welcome to the next 30 years.
We need a circle.
See you soon. Thank you.
For a while it got me by.